So as a bit of a background here, I'm 21 now and still live at home while trying to get into school and whatnot. This house was brand new when we moved in, just built, so we were the first to live in it. My experiences aren't so much creepy as they are just strange, I think. Or maybe I've just become numb to them or something. Anyway, here it goes. So, my first experience I ever had was when I was 12. I used to have a cable box hooked up to my computer monitor in my bedroom. One night, around 11 PM I'd say, I was woken to my monitor turning on and the TV blaring at max volume. It scared the living hell out of me and my cat too. I jumped out of bed and quickly turned it off, and just as it fell quiet, I heard footsteps in our laundry room and the door to the garage slamming shut. A few days later, I was up in bed reading and I glanced up to my doorway and I remember clear as day a pure white face peeking in before casually moving out of view. A few months after this incident, I'd been going into the kitchen one night, again around 11 PM, to grab a late night snack. But for some fucking reason, I decided not to turn any lights on my way there and would just turn on my kitchen lights instead. Well, at the end of the hallway, just before entering the kitchen, I looked to my left towards where our dinner table was, and something was standing there behind the table in the corner. And I shit you not, it looked like someone just standing there with a bedsheet over them or something. I stared for what must have been a solid 10 seconds, calm, and then just casually went to turn on the light. I looked back and whatever had been there was now gone. After these incidents, things became relatively calm again. I remember small incidences like seeing things out of the corner of my eye. I usually chalked it up to I just wasn't sleeping enough, but everything I thought I saw just felt too real to be imaginary. There had been a night too, around 1 AM I think, when I was in the living room just watching television on the couch, and out of nowhere, there was a loud bang against the window behind the couch. It sounded like a huge bird hit it, which I guess is possible, but at 1 AM that seems pretty unlikely if you ask me. I was too afraid to look and ended up just convincing myself that maybe an owl hit the window or something. After a while too, things started to go missing. When I was 13, my dad, he woke me up earlier than usual one morning just asking me where my lunch bag went. I told him that it was in the same place as always, the second pocket in my backpack. I got up to check for myself and it wasn't there. Confused, I just assumed that I left it at school or something and went back to sleep. Around an hour later that same morning, I checked my bag a second time and there was my lunch bag in the same pocket it was supposed to be. Dad swore to me that he never found it, and I believed him honestly because checking the bag leftovers from yesterday's lunch, they were still in there. This was one of the strangest things out of all of my experiences, and honestly, I just can't explain it. When I was about 14, I came home from school one day and found that the faucet for the tub had been disassembled and set neatly in a pile on the toilet. I called my dad and he also swore again that he didn't touch it, and actually ended up blaming me for it. At 15, this one's a little bit funny to be honest. I was taking a shower and noticed the water had gotten significantly colder. There was no way that I'd used up all the hot water yet, so I turned around and saw the handle had been turned to cold. This asshole of a ghost, or whatever it was trying to get me to wash my hair with cold water like I should have in the first place. But now for the two scariest stories that I want to share with you guys. One might not have been paranormal at all, but hey, I'll let you guys decide for yourself. It could have just been an animal, but it was terrifying nonetheless. So, I was 17 at the time, and I've always had a fear of looking out windows at night. I can't explain it, it just kind of terrifies me to my core. One night, I'd been laying in bed just Skyping my girlfriend when I glanced to my window. My bed is set right against the window, so I'm kind of laying against it almost. One of my blinds was crooked, kind of allowing me to see outside, and when I looked, Two eyes, reflective ones, were staring right back at me. My house is a one-story, but my window is way too high off the ground for a raccoon or a possum to just peer through like that. Whatever it was stared at me for a solid 10 seconds before just disappearing. I made my girlfriend Skype with me until I fell asleep for 5 nights after that too, because it honestly just scared the crap out of me. And the most recent event was just last week. It was about 4 in the morning and I got up to use the bathroom in the hallway. As I was leaving the bathroom, I stopped and looked to my right directly into the kitchen just a few feet away. It took me a second to realize, but something was standing there. And as soon as I realized it quickly just walked off. Both my parents were asleep at the time, I can confirm that. And just a few days ago, my girlfriend had been using the bathroom when she texted me asking if I was in the bathroom. The bath is sectioned off by 2 areas, and the toilet and the bath have a door between the sinks. And she swore that she heard a thud on the counter and something being moved around. Anyway, thanks to anyone who listened to this, and I can't explain any of it, and I'm all ears if you guys have any ideas. So a little background before I get to the story. So, my family and I moved into a new house when I was 14. It was newly built and we were the first to live in it. It was my parents, my sister and I, and throughout the years we'd have family get-togethers and parties where everyone has a great time. When I was 15, however, at one of these family get-togethers, I was sitting in the living room with one of my cousins while everyone else was in the dining room or in the front room. The living room is connected to the kitchen, so no matter where you sit, you can always either see the trash can, which it had a flipped lid, or the table. While me and my cousin were just chatting, something caused us both to turn our heads. We saw the trash can's lid flip on its own. We got up to check, confused if anyone had gotten up to throw something away, and no. Everyone was still playing a game or chatting in the same space. We figured that it was the vent above the trash can that made it flip, or something. Neither one of us said anything about it again, but we were both pretty creeped out by it. So we also had a babysitter who would stay with us occasionally because my father was on a tour in Iraq and my mother worked nights. I know it's ridiculous for a 14-year-old to have a babysitter, but my mother felt that it was necessary. Besides, the babysitter was only 5 years older than me, so I enjoyed our talks and time together. She slept in the guest bedroom for a while before I noticed that she started sleeping downstairs. One day, I asked her why she didn't sleep in the room, and her face turned pale and she quietly asked, "Hey, have you ever had anything weird happen to you in this house?" I looked at her confused, but remembered the trash can incident. I didn't reply though, and she just kept looking at me and then said, "You know, I'm probably going to sound crazy, but I think your guest room has something in it." I continued to look at her, not saying a word, and she continued. "One night, I got up because I felt like something was just wrong, and I went to check on you guys, and you were both sleeping, so I went back to bed. Laying there, I started to notice the statue doll you have on the nightstand was staring at me. Like staring, but I turned around and I started falling back to sleep. And that's when I heard these whispers coming from the vent. I thought it was you guys again, but when I checked, you were both still asleep." She ended the conversation and went to sit on the couch, leaving me there kind of just baffled. But ever since that night, I started getting a bad feeling in my gut. When I was 17, we got a new dog who was a Chihuahua. She slept in my sister's room with her every night, and one night, I woke up to my sister just standing over me. And she said to me, "Can I sleep with you? The dog is freaking me out." I couldn't respond as I had just woken up and just kind of scooted over for her. In the morning, however, I asked my sister what had happened. She replied, "Well, I don't know. I was about to go to sleep when the dog sat up from my lap and just started whining and looking at the vent. She started barking, and that's when I took her and just went to your room." Again, I didn't respond. After a couple of days, I was still thinking about it, and it only hit me then about the babysitter that we used to have, when she said, I heard whispers coming from the vent. I tried to shake it off because a couple of weeks later, my little cousins were spending the night. So on one night, one of them slept in my sister's room and the other, they slept with me in my room. I didn't dare want to sleep in the guest room, so I slept on the floor with my cousins on my bed. Eventually I fell asleep, but my room was pitch black when I woke up in the middle of the night. My doors to my bedroom closet were open as I had gotten out a blanket earlier. I don't know why, but I suddenly started to feel nervous. I kept looking at my closet too, and I had an iDog, which was a robotic dog that you connected to your iPod to do music, and it would play out of the speaker from its back. And depending on what music you played, it showed you its emotions by colours that turned on in the front of its face. Green was happy, yellow was for mellow, and red was for when it was mad. I remember that I hadn't touched it in weeks because it kind of ran out of batteries, and I hadn't gotten new ones, so I just left it on the shelf on the top of my closet. As I was staring into my closet, I started to hear growling, and I saw the iDog's face started to light up red. It barked and moved back and forth, and I reached up to my cousin to wake her up, but she was out of my reach and I was too scared to move. So I just sat there, staring, and finally it stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night that night, and in the morning I threw my iDog in the trash bin. Since then, I've kept my closet doors closed with a rope unless I'm changing clothes or something. But I noticed that there was a vent near the closet too. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this now, having almost forgotten everything, is because recently my boyfriend has been spending the night a lot. I'm 25 now and still living at home while I'm finishing school, and my sister lives in New York for the most part because of school too. My father and mother split up a while back, so he moved out, and my mum goes out a lot with her friends. So it's usually me and my boyfriend alone. My room only has a one-person fit bed, so we sleep in the guest room since my boyfriend likes to take up a lot of space when he moves around at night. One night, my mum was out of town for a weekend trip. I had just gotten out of the bathroom and walked into the room where my boyfriend was examining the vent. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Hey, I could have sworn that I saw something coming out of this thing, but there's nothing now. Maybe it was just a bug or something. Do you have problems with that sort of thing here?" I must admit that I didn't pay much attention since we decided to just go to sleep right away. But I woke up in the middle of the night because I just had a nightmare, and I actually just recently suffered from PTSD, so it wasn't uncommon lately that I would have night terrors or whatnot. But anywho, I woke up and looked over at my boyfriend who had his back against me and was snoring away. I got up to take some pills and returned to the room. When I did, my boyfriend was standing under the vent. I jokingly said, "What, did the bed bugs come back?" He didn't reply. I then sat on the bed, and the only light that was in the room was coming from the moon from the window. I then said, "Hey babe, come back to bed," but he still didn't reply. Then I said, "Babe, you're starting to freak me out." He turned, confused, like, "Your mum is out of town, right?" I nodded, not knowing where he was going with this, and then he said, "Sorry, I don't mean to scare you, but it's the weirdest thing, but I swear that she was calling for help." "What? What do you mean?" I asked, getting scared. "Well, I heard her yell faintly for help, but it was coming from the vent." We decided that he was probably dreaming in the end, and we just went back to sleep. Well, he did at least. The next weekend, my boyfriend had fallen asleep first, and I stayed up reading. When I finished, I turned off the light and cuddled with my boyfriend. When I was just about to drift off, I could have sworn that I heard my sister call me. I looked up and there was nothing there. I figured it was just me about to start dreaming, so I turned back to go to sleep. And again, I heard my sister call me. This time, it was clear, and I looked at the direction of the sound, and it was coming from the vent. I kept looking, waiting, and then I heard, over here. I knew I wasn't dreaming this time, and I knew it had whispered that. I immediately shook my boyfriend awake to tell him what happened, and he insisted that I was dreaming like he did the week before and tried to calm me down. He hasn't spent the night since because I don't want to sleep in the guest room, and I don't want to sleep in my room either. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like the boogeyman is in my vents, just waiting to come and get me, trying to lure me under it for something. And I'll tell you this much, as soon as I can, I'm moving out of here. This has left me feeling extremely shook, and I'd love some opinions on this, especially from someone with experience. So, last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into a national forest. I like to camp in national parks and forests because it's kind of isolated, so my dog can roam and they're free of charge. It's a trade-off for sketchy and rough drives into the park sometimes for lack of service and assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. I think. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling just didn't let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in with the dirt and gravel road. Yuka, my dog, starts growling slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl at or with other dogs. I did see her growling at a possum once, so it could have been something that she smelt maybe. The place continued to make me feel quite on edge though, but I pride myself on being an independent traveller and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. As we continue though, I begin to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind that no one is going to be going more than, say, 5 or 10 miles per hour up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even here. I hear men's voices and they sound close, and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car, but then just kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying, and I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back into my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously, looking for where the voices could be coming from. Strange thing is, I've never run into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows too about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and I give up and begin to turn my car around at this point. I honestly don't remember how Yuka was acting on the way down, because I was scared and focused on just getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car. But kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. In the end, I decided to spring for luxury and got a hotel for the night. I figured that I was just fine, and it was just huge and open spaces that can be intimidating, I told myself. And the voices could have just been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened, cool. But I remember this place, and it sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling that I had driving up that mountain, and It's honestly kind of interesting to me as well as frightening. But I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American law that made me feel extremely uneasy about the whole thing. So, fast forward a year, and I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. I googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but it didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, hence my fascination in this little event. So my boyfriend and I were coming off and finishing our road trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 or 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a True Scary Stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm kind of half paying attention, just petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. It very briefly says what they are and casually mentions that they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills that I've ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest that I was freaked out about last year. He says that he does, and he reminds me that he texted me that I was probably close to a Wendigo. And I looked back into that text and he actually did. I also remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought that he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you or something. And he was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you said that you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel really strange about this, and I start Googling Wendigos and find more information, etc., etc. But they're allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they would live in that sort of area, and it just kind of all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find some more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eyes is another family goes missing. And I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they're all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees and whatnot. But I remember looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized that these stories just didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not been found there, on top of many which are just found dead. And the whole thing just has my intuition super spiked. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I just wanted to get out of there just terrifies me. And I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing and still do to this day. My dog and I are very close. She was actually a stray that started following me one day, and I ended up bringing her home from Costa Rica. So her little growls along the way just makes me feel like there was something wrong and more to the whole thing. I've done a lot of solo traveling both in and out of the country, and I have to say that I've never had such a bad feeling, on top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seems strange. I don't think I'll be doing any more solo traveling unless it's around civilization from now on, but does anyone know about authentic Native American lore, or has anyone else had a kind of inexplicable experience like this? Extra points if you've had any bad vibes in national forests from California too. So I've had weird experiences my whole life, and to be honest, you'll probably hear more from me on here. But this is the first time that I've told anyone about anything that's happened to me, and this happened a few years ago, and I wanted to share it with you guys to maybe get some answers. So, at the time, I was living with my parents, and I was probably 19 or 20, I think. I had 2 cats that slept in my room during the night, and another detail worth noting is that my room was set up with my bed against the wall across from the door, a dresser at the end of the bed, and the closet was across to the left of the dresser, so the opposite corner of my bed. My ceiling fan had one of those remote controls for the settings and the light too. A super cool feature for me because I hated getting out of bed to turn the lights off and all. Anyway, It was like mid-November, I think, and I don't remember what time it was that I woke up. I just know that it was the middle of the night. I don't know what prompted me to wake up so suddenly, but when I did, I heard a shuffle in my closet. I kept the litter boxes in my closet and the left door slightly cracked for the cats to get in and out, so I assumed that it was just one of them in the closet. But when I turned over, my boy was right next to me where he always sleeps, and this made me prop up a little bit to see where my other cat was. I saw her silhouette in the dark, sound asleep at the foot of my bed, and my mind was really tired, and to be honest, I just didn't care for the annoyance of being woken up in the middle of the night, so my head hit the pillow once again. Keep in mind, I've dealt with strange things my whole life, so I didn't think much of the noise in the closet. As I was starting to drift off, though, I heard something slide across the floor from my closet to the end of my bed. The sound could be best described as a stuffed animal or a cat toy sliding across the floor. I glanced over once again to see both cats asleep, and now I began to panic. In the dark, still laying down trying to be as invisible as possible, I felt around for the remote to the light. I quickly found it and pressed the button, and nothing. And then I felt something jump up onto the bed at the foot. It felt about the size of my cat, so it was a small animal or creature-like. Now, what happened in this moment was just so terrifying that I don't even remember what happened with my cats. I'm not sure if they woke up and ran or were just unfazed completely. But this thing moved up my bed. I could feel the pressure and the movement of the sheets around me. I kept pressing the damn light button, but nothing was happening. And then this thing is on top of me all of a sudden, just scratching me. I started screaming, hoping that my parents down the hall would come in and save me, and I'm not sure if my screams were actual words like help or just terrifyingly screaming at the top of my lungs. But the creature felt like it had fur or hair or something. I never actually saw it, and that could have been because I closed my eyes out of fear, or it was just too dark or something, but it started speaking to me. I don't exactly remember the sound of its voice, only that it kept telling me, "It's October." And now, there was obviously confusion added to my terror. I mean, it was November, not October. So was this thing trying to tell me that its name was October or something? Or trying to tell me something about October? I was just too terrified at the time to question anything though, and I just kept screaming. And then, all of a sudden, the scratching just stopped and it just disappeared. I mean, the creature just literally vanished before my eyes. I clicked the button once again and the light finally turned on. I still don't remember where my cats ended up being, and I don't even remember falling back to sleep. But what I do remember is the next morning, and having scratches on my stomach. But here's the even weirder part. When I told my parents about it, and more importantly, questioned why the hell they didn't come running when I was screaming, they said that they never heard me screaming. And my mum told me that she woke up feeling like something was watching her, and she looked up to see these eyes just staring at her from across the room. She explained to me that they looked like owl eyes, and the silhouette was of a small animal type thing. And then my dad told me about a dream that he had about a small furry creature, but I don't remember the rest of what he told me. And I don't know what this creature was or what it wanted, and more importantly, what is the significance of October? Was it a demon, or was it just sleep paralysis? I often question my sanity about this, but both my parents had similar encounters which validated my experience too. Has anyone else had a similar encounter? Or does anyone have any info on what this creature could have been? I mean, the whole event just still gives me chills to this day. So a bit of backstory first. So my ex-boyfriend and I, we're still very good friends and occasional friends with benefits. He and I sometimes have threesomes with friends of his. Please don't judge my sex life. And I recently went drinking with my ex Carter and his friend Paul. Recently, as in about 2 days ago. So, Cart and Paul showed up Sunday morning at 7:30 a.m. Cart wanted to drink with me since he's being put on probation soon and won't be able to. So, I went with them and got to know Paul a little. He's 22, just broke up with his girlfriend of a year and decided to just avoid relationships entirely. He has a slightly huskier build with an oval face and slightly beady blue eyes. His blonde hair is in a crew cut, and his style of glasses kind of made him resemble the BTK killer. Anyway, Cart and Paul and I did our thing, and then Paul offered to give me a ride back home. Cart had his license taken away and has to go to classes to get it back and all. I didn't want to walk home later, as it was supposed to be a bitching hot day, so I accepted. He drove me home, asking if we could pull over and do it before he dropped me off, but I declined. I really only sleep with his friends because it's something that he enjoys, and I just want to make Cart happy. So he dropped me off and told me that he would hit me up to hang out sometime, but made it very clear that he wasn't looking for a relationship, which I was totally okay with. He added me on Snapchat, but didn't try to talk to me, so I figured he was just another faceless person from mine and Cart's sexual misadventures. But I woke up at 2:30 a.m. today to Paul sitting on my bed. He squeezed my leg, which is what woke me up. And at first, I thought it was my brother JJ because he gets nightmares sometimes and will come into my room. But then, I realized how weird it would be if he grabbed my thigh to wake me up, so I opened my eyes and saw him just staring over me. Hey, you texted me earlier, so I thought I'd stop by. I definitely hadn't texted him. After he left, I checked my phone too to make sure I hadn't, and I was right. There was no conversation between us at all. But I was very groggy and not really comprehending the situation, so I told him how late it was, turned away from him, and told him to just leave. Are you sure you don't want me to stay? Are you okay? I came over to hang out. He kept his hand on my thigh the entire time. I was fully awake at this point and had this growing sense of just, this is bad in my stomach. I repeated that he needed to go, and he finally stood up, telling me to call him tomorrow. I grumbled, sure, whatever dude, just get the hell out. He stood there for a minute and then asked me to walk him out to his car. I told him no, obviously, and he asked me if I was sure I didn't want to walk him out. He was, oddly, pretty insistent on it too, but I told him that he just needed to leave now, and I need my sleep and I have to be up at 6:45. I heard him start walking down the hallway and my chest finally relaxed a little. That is, until he came back in. Hey, there's someone downstairs, so I really need you to walk me out, okay? I was mad at this point. Paul had interrupted my sleep, broken into my house. Now he had the audacity to demand that I walk him out of the house that he just broke into. Paul, I'm not getting out of bed. Just go out the back door. Nobody's going to say anything to you, okay? He got the hint, and I heard him walk downstairs, and I heard the door shut. I waited about a half an hour before going downstairs and made sure that he was gone, and made sure that the doors were locked too. I told my aunt when she woke up at around 4 what happened, and she told me to come and get her next time. I also texted Carter about what happened, and I don't want to tell my dad or uncles what happened. I don't want them to blame Carter, but I know I have to. What happened tonight was just so weird, especially with how normal Paul was acting about it. For a minute there, I thought I was overreacting and that because I'm a bit of a slut, that Paul was allowed to do this or something. But my aunt pointed out that no normal guy would do this, and it's not mine nor Cart's fault. I'm going to ask JJ to sleep in my room tomorrow, just in case Paul comes back. So, today, I was staying in a hotel about 275 miles or so from home. I've been in the city for a couple of days, but we just switched hotels last night due to the fact that the other one was mold-infested and gross. Anyways, we're here to drop my brother off at college, and tonight was his last night with us before we left. We decided to have a silly string fight in the hotel parking lot, run around the outside of the hotel, and just fun, stupid teenager things. Somebody was actually on the top of the stairs that led to the second floor of the motel watching and staring at us, which was no big deal though. I mean, we were being pretty loud and obnoxious after all. But my brother and my mum left to bring my brother back to his dorm room, and I decided to stay behind at the hotel room as all I had been doing for the past 3 days was riding in a car and I just needed a break. And I was on the phone with my friend, Adrian. So I was just talking to Adrian when all of a sudden someone knocks on the door the same exact way that my mum does. We have one of those silly little secret knocks. I was about to swing open the door per usual, as I was 99% certain that it was my mother, but something just told me to look out the peephole for some reason. And the person standing outside my hotel room door was the same person watching us earlier on the top of the stairs. Now, I'm very paranoid, so obviously I just didn't answer the door. And I started freaking out and talking to Adrian quietly, and the person yells, "Open this fucking door," and starts banging harder on the door. I sit there just talking quietly to Adrian for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then slowly walk back up to the door and go to look through the peephole, when all of a sudden this person slams their body weight against the door and starts viciously shaking the handle. At this point, I text my brother on Snapchat at least 30 times to come back to the hotel. He says they're about 10 minutes away and just to sit tight and that he's coming back. He does, and by the time that they get back, the person is gone. After everything that's gone down, I'm still pretty shaken up by this. Last night too, I went to the front desk as we were leaving to go take my brother back to his dorm. I decided to go with him when they come back to the hotel and told them if anyone asked for a keycard to my room to not give it to them, as with this motel, they don't require any ID or proof of being in that room. You just have to ask for the key to the room number and they apparently just give it to you. And apparently, my paranoia paid off, because according to the front desk clerk, the same person came and asked for a key to my room. I'm not sure what would have happened if I would have opened that door or if they would have managed to obtain a key to my room, but man, I do not want to find out. So there's this hiking trail close to the school that I go to. It's about 2 miles to the top, I think, and it has a beautiful view over the entire valley. So, my friends and I went up one Saturday, and the sun was beginning to set right as we started the 2-mile walk down. Terrible timing, I know, but luckily we know the trail. Everything is good, creepy though because it's getting dark and I'm a little bit paranoid about being out here. I'm not really paying attention, but I hear my friend say, "What's up?" I don't have good eyesight, so I looked, but I didn't see anything. "Hey, it's a girl," my guy friend said. I was freaked because, it's 9 o'clock on a hiking trail that not a single other person is on. As we get closer, I see that she's sitting on the ground in what looks like a pile of leaves with her knees to her chest. She's also rocking back and forth in only a pink nightgown. And it's February. My friends and I chalk it up to someone being on a terrible trip in the woods or something. Feeling bad since that actually happened to my friend once, we debated asking if she needed help. That was until my friend saw that she was actually cradling a knife in her lap. And fuck that, I thought. I'm out of here. More freaked out, we pick up our pace but still think the girl could just be tripping. We start joking and saying that it must be a terrible trip in the woods at night to try and calm ourselves down and all that, but then we see a man running frantically up the trail, asking if we've seen his daughter. This girl was apparently about 20, not a little girl, although she was dressed like one. We say, no, we haven't seen her, because we were freaked the hell out, thinking that we may have just seen a girl who escaped a kidnapper or something. As you can guess, we just ran the rest of the way after this. Unfortunately, where we were parked, there wasn't a single other car to call and give a license plate number to either, but we did call and report what we saw, and and they searched, but we never heard an update. To this day, I don't know what was happening in those woods, but I don't know if I ever even want to. By the way, there was no cell service until we got to our car, and we saw the girl when we were about a mile from our car, and it was almost pitch black, mind you. We had no way of being able to continue to watch her because it was just way too dark. We were also a group of 2 female and a male with nothing for self-defense unless we were able to find something. If I'm being honest, it was just a really scary situation, and I was frozen in fear, and we had no way of knowing if someone was using a female to lure us in or what it was. I kind of regret not saying something, but we did as much as we could while trying to keep ourselves safe. Anyway, like I said, I have no idea what was going on out there, but it was weird. This is something that happened to me just a couple of months ago. So, I love Facebook, I love memes, I love talking to new people, I love long comment sections, all that stuff. But that being said, I never give away personal information such as where I work or live, and my birthday info is private, so on and so forth. I've made quite a few friends that I don't know personally, in fact, but agree with or had really good discussions with. So, after commenting back and forth on a friend's post for a while, it was no surprise to me when Tyler messaged me. It started off fairly simple. I mean, we just talked about the post that we commented on, how do you do's, common interests, all that type of stuff. I was honestly excited to have a new friend, and he seemed pretty interesting, and we had a lot in common too. I'm not a beauty queen or anything, but I let him know after about half an hour of casual conversation that I was taken happily. I enjoyed his friendship, but it wouldn't lead into anything more since I'm going to get married next year anyway. He seemed a little upset, to be honest, but respectful for the most part, which was good enough for me. I told him good night, went to sleep, and thought nothing of it. The conversation continued for a few days, though, and he started to get a little pushy if I didn't respond immediately, and told him that I was very busy, so I may not always answer right away, and he apologized for that and told me that he's just bored and lonely. I started to put a little distance between us, though, because he didn't really back down, but I didn't want to completely give up on my new friendship because I hated the fact that he was so lonely. One day, he randomly messaged me saying that he wanted to have me in his arms, though. I immediately nipped that in the bud, reminding him of my relationship and telling him that if he didn't stop, then our friendship would be done because I respect and am loyal to my fiancé about anyone else. And he immediately lost his shit, messaging me saying that he didn't care about my fiancé, making threats towards him and all that stuff. I stopped messaging him after this and selected to put his messages on ignore. He could still message me, but it wouldn't go to my inbox anymore. I made a post about it too, and a friend of mine commented and said that he had done the same thing to her, except he knew where she lived and would show up outside of her house, in fact. At this point, I freaked out and went to see if there were more messages from him because she told me that he was bad news and I should call the police if any threats were being made. And this is where the shitstorm really began. So he had messaged me over a dozen times, different things. It started off kind of taunting me for not answering, and then moved into him messaging me about some asshole who cut him off as he was driving too slow for his taste or something. Then to him saying that he was going to shoot the guy, and it would be my fault because I made him so angry by ignoring him. I messaged him telling me to just leave me the hell alone and stopped replying for a while. But he started messaging me and narrowing down where I live. And that really freaked me out, as I'd never told him where I lived or anything even remotely close to my house. The only thing I'd ever said was I'd talk to him later because I was going to Arby's to get some food and my phone was dying. Yet he somehow knew that I was 7 minutes away from the Arby's by my house, exactly how long it takes to walk there for me, and there are several Arby's in my city. Then he started narrowing down to what street I lived off of, down to knowing a 4-door black sedan was linked to my address, which, mind you, there was, but it wasn't in my name. It was in my sister's name when she registered it as an Uber. And that was enough for me, and I called the non-emergency line. The police refused to do anything, of course, saying until he actually showed up or did something that there was nothing that they could do. Never mind that he was sending me pictures of dead people and saying that he was going to be my family and was narrowing down my address and all. But unless he actually showed up, I was pretty much screwed. All I could do was apply for a protective order, and so I did. Tyler kept messaging me though, so I told him that there was a protective order in place and he needed to leave me alone. He responded with there was nothing that could be done until he was served and signed it, which, to be honest, was true. My fiancé is actually in IT and has a cousin who's pretty tech-savvy as well, and they managed to get the last couple of addresses Tyler had, but the police couldn't find him at either of those. We had license plate numbers and addresses and full names and birthdays, yet he seemed pretty much completely untraceable. Strangely enough, though, he actually stopped for a while, but the day of my court case to have the PO extended for 2 years, he started up again. My fiancé actually filed criminal charges for the threats that he made, and he said that someone could come shoot you in 15 minutes. His last known address was actually a 15-minute drive away from my house, which was really creepy too. I've spent the last couple of months completely afraid, and he was actually arrested and served finally. I think he was speeding or something, and it turns out he has a history of this. Multiple charges, all dropped and dismissed of course, but he's done it to a couple of my friends who showed up to my court case for the criminal charges. They dropped everything from felonies to a misdemeanor disorderly conduct charge, with 12 months suspended jail time depending on his behavior because they couldn't prove that it was him and not someone else behind the keyboard. Especially with me never seeing his face in real life before this court date, even though I had 2 people who had received messages from him and seen him face to face as well. Anyway, currently I can't sleep and the slightest noise wakes me up panicking, and it's been just hell for my family. I just really hope that this whole thing ends soon. When I was little, around 7 I'd say, I lived with my mum and my sister. We have different dads but the same mum. My mother and father had separated a couple of years before and lived apart, and my dad lived about 2 hours away, and I saw him every other weekend. Since the separation, my mum had gone on various dates with different people, but they never really worked out. At this point, I would also like to mention that my mum drank a lot of alcohol. She had a hard life, and alcohol had been a way for her to cope with it, and I've made my peace with it, and she's a lot better today. Anyway, one morning, I remember waking up and going into my mum's room and seeing a strange man in bed with her. Nothing completely unusual, just another date that I'd probably never see again. However, since then the date, John, never really left our lives, and he and my mum just ended up dating. John was actually nice at first and would let me and my sister, who's 6 years older than me, stay at his house when my mum did, and he would give us sweets and all sorts of stuff. However, eventually, and I can't really remember when, John began to become abusive. Honestly, I was so young and it all feels like a blur now, but I can recall bits and pieces of information, and I remember him and my mum getting into arguments, and he would break stuff around the house and at points even hit my mum. Later on, I learned that he did stuff like rip my mum's earrings out and hold a samurai sword to her throat. Every time that they would get into a fight, he would leave at stupid times, like at 3 in the morning, and my mum would leave a bit later to go after him, I assume, which would leave me and my sister, then 13, to look after me and get me ready for school and whatnot. After school, I would walk out to see both John and my mum in the car just waiting for me, and I would always feel dread because he would still be in our lives. Now, you might think that that would be the creepy part to this story, but no. You see, John was in this organization or club for men. I don't want to say the name of it here because of anonymity reasons, but it was all very secretive. He was never allowed to talk about what happened at their meetings to my mum or even to us. Women were not allowed to join either, and the only time women could join events was the annual ladies' event that they often held, which my mum would go to. Around the same time, my nan, who lived very close to us, got into a relationship with a man named Kenny. Kenny was also a part of this organization, and him and John were very friendly with each other. And my mum strongly believes that Kenny and John actually knew each other before they knew my nan and my mum. Kenny was also very abusive towards my nan, to the point that once he knocked her tooth out. Kenny and John's friendship all came to an end one night, though, when my mum and John were visiting my nan and Kenny, whilst me and my sister were visiting our dads. What my mum remembered was that she was offering to make Kenny a roast dinner for tomorrow. She then went to the toilet, and when she came back, she heard the conversation between Kenny and John became heated. Before she could even turn around to see what was going on, she felt 2 punches to the neck. John pushed her and yelled at her to run, and when she turned around, she saw Kenny stabbing John 8 times. Somehow, they escaped out the front door with my nan, and it was only then that my mum realised that she had been stabbed in the back of the neck twice. Eventually, the police turned up and Kenny was arrested whilst my mum and John were taken to hospital. Luckily, they both survived, and we never did find out the reason why Kenny just suddenly became hostile and stabbed my mum and John, though. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was something to do with this organization that they shared. We never saw Kenny again after the court case ended, but we believe that he may have got into a psychiatric hospital. Apparently, he pleaded that a mental illness had pushed him to stab them or something. After Kenny was gone, my nan, who actually had schizophrenia, came to stay with us for a while until she felt safe and mentally sound to go back home. I really do think, too, that Kenny really did a number on her, and she was just never quite right after all that. Now, despite Creeper Kenny being gone, John was still around, which didn't make life any easier. He made life hell for us, in fact. Constantly getting angry, hitting my mum, getting angry at me and my sister. On one occasion, I remember I dropped and broke a pot of mustard on the floor, and I remember my mum and I just kind of froze because we were so terrified at how John would react. My sister, being a bit older than me, she remembers a lot of the creepy things that she caught him doing, such as sitting on my bed one night when I was at my dad's. When she asked him what he was doing, he said that where else would he be? My sister walked into my mum crying once, and she asked what was wrong, and John literally said to a 16-year-old that her mum was just sexually assaulted. He made me and my mum go for walks at midnight around the neighbourhood if we made him angry. My sister can't remember why, but she once was so terrified and upset at John that she ran out of the house barefoot and ran all the way to her dad's house, which was about a 10-minute walk away. When she arrived at her dad's house, John was already waiting there and said, "I wanted to make sure that you were okay." And that really messed with my sister because she left the house before John did, and she sprinted to her dad's house. The only way that he would have made it there before her was if he ran too. My mum became very strange and weird during this time with John too, doing things that she never had done before, as if she was having some sort of mental breakdown or something. At the time, we believed it was just because John was abusive and because of the alcohol. However, in recent years, she's admitted to us that she actually believed that John was drugging her. She even ended up marrying him overnight with only 2 witnesses, both from the secret organization, mind you. She looked drugged up in the wedding photos too, and we only found out that they were married a week later. She never felt right in her time with him too, and she told us that whenever she went to the ladies' nights, she wouldn't remember the night in the slightest. One night, in fact, John made the creepiest comment towards my sister when she was around 13. They were talking about the ladies' night, and he said, "Now that you're old enough, we'll buy you a pretty dress and you can come to the ladies' night with us." My sister told me that when he said that, she felt so uncomfortable and hated the idea of it and just completely refused to go outright. He made the same comment to me when I was 10, saying that when I was a bit older, I could go. I remember being really excited about buying a dress and being able to go to the secret club that my mum often went to. But after learning about how my mum never remembered the ladies' nights, I'm pretty glad that I never got the chance to go. And I was 11 when I woke up to the sound of my mum screaming. John had passed away. He was diabetic, but was terrible at managing his insulin levels, and he just died from too much fluid in his lungs. And that was both the worst and best day of my life. I mean, I would never wish anyone dead, but when John passed away, I must admit that I felt a huge weight lift off of my chest. I know that that's an awful thing for an 11-year-old to feel. I mean, I shiver whenever I think about what our lives might have been like if he was still alive, though, and I wonder if we would have even survived. Anyway, I just want to add one more thing to the story, because on one occasion, John got beat up really badly. So badly that a couple of his ribs broke, and John got the police involved, but the culprit was just never found. A few months ago, my dad and I were talking, and he finally admitted that the person that beat up John was my dad's brother. Apparently, everyone knew, even John, but no one told the police because they all thought that he deserved it. So this event took place about 25 years ago, I'd say. So I apologize in advance if it's not as detailed as you'd like. I want to stay as true to the memory as possible, though, and I only want to share what I remember. If there are any questions or comments which trigger more details, I'll gladly flesh it out a bit, though. So, I was 7 and my younger sister was 5, and we disembarked the school bus hand in hand, excited about our first week of school, ready to tell Mum all about it. We rounded the corner for home and saw that there was no car in the driveway. Little sister was happily chatting about her teacher, new friends, and the playground, but for some reason, I just felt unsettled. Why was Mum gone? Mum was always waiting for us, usually with chopped fruit or veggies. I mean, she was ahead of the curve on that. But the no junk food rule embarrassed me as a kid, but I'm so grateful for that now. Well, maybe just the car was gone. Silly thought, but not everyone's a genius when they're only 7, right? As we reached the intersection of the porch and driveway, I knew the car was gone because Mum was gone, because the front door was shut. But we weren't latchkey kids, although that was quite normal in our neighbourhood, I must admit, but I did have a house key, just in case. I'd always wondered what our parents had meant by giving us this key, but this must have been the case. I released my little sister's hand and knelt down to fish the key out of the bottom of my pouch of my backpack. I was a little nervous, I must admit, but proud, I remember. And when I rose to unlock the door, I froze. Looking down on us from inside the house was a figure dressed head to toe in all black. To my mind now, this camouflage was so complete that there wasn't anything revealed around the eyes to indicate this person's race or anything. I stopped with the key in my hand, and although I had no intention of getting in now, the figure shook its head back and forth as if to say no. I dropped the key and urged my little sister off the porch immediately. I was at a complete loss as to what to do in this situation, so I led my little sister to the side yard where we had a tire swing and a rope swing and told her that we would just wait for Mum. This had not been part of a just-in-case conversation. When I folded myself into the tire swing, in fact, I realized that I had wet my pants. The little sister asked me what was wrong, and lying was never my strong point, so I told her that someone was in the house. She looked puzzled and said to me, "It's just Daddy's friend." I asked her how she knew, and she answered that she just did. I told her that we would wait for Mum anyway, but that was weird. I don't know how long it was that we waited. I was frightened, hungry, and uncomfortable in my wet pants. Whoever was in the house left from the back door because, after some time, my dog darted around the house and happily greeted us. The fence was actually being redone in the back, and everyone who lived in our house knew to put him on a chain rather than just let him run freely and escape through the gaps and all. Upon Sonny's arrival, little sister was ready to go in, and I was not. We argued in the way kids do, exchanging witty insults such as dumb and stupid head, but I was able to win the battle due to the merit of my age. Eventually, Mum finally pulled into the driveway, and Sonny and I beelined straight to her. I'd given in to the tears that I'd been repressing, and the only thing that shocked me out of my hysterics was Mum urging me to come into the house. I managed to finally tell her about the man in black, and little sister chimed in with Daddy's friend, and then Mum ushered all of us back into the car, even Sonny, and drove a few blocks to a friend's house. The police were called, and we were questioned together and separately, and we were left with Mum's friend while she and the officers walked through the house and all. There had been a break-in focused on the basement, Dad's territory, and my parents' bedroom. But strangely enough, if anything was gone, Mum didn't know what it was, and Dad feigned innocence in relation to his friend. Nothing like this ever happened again after this, and when I asked Mum if she remembered it, she told me that the past is better left there. Honestly, I've never been that scared since, and I hope I never will be again. So this is my dad's story, and just to explain, he's ex-British Army and not scared of anything, and super practical. So, he became a lorry driver about 1975, I think, and this was not long after he started. So this happened about 5 a.m. on a summer's day. It was a bit misty like you get some mornings early, but it was bright and he was heading out of London on the A3. He's driving his lorry, and up ahead was a young woman, early 20s in a long blue dress, just standing by the side of the road. It must have been before the A3 was duelled and all the barriers were put up. Anyway, so Dad sees her and thinks that she's just waiting for a ride to work or something. But just as he's about to pass her, though, she jumps in front of his lorry and he immediately slams on the brakes as he's sure that he's hit her now. But he didn't feel a bang, but where else could she have been, right? A couple of cars stop to see what's going on, and Dad shakily explains what happened, and the drivers kindly offer to stay while he looks for her under the lorry. But Dad looks, and she's not there. Other drivers look, and there's nothing. No body, no blood, no sign of anyone. They all freak out a bit because they saw the woman too, and then just decide to leave because it was the best idea that they had. He still can't explain it, and he knows that she was there and he even hit her. And he spent the rest of his driving career avoiding that route. So, I haven't actually told anyone about my experience with the ghosts at my dad's old house, and I haven't formally discussed it in years, I think. But my dad bought a beautiful home back in 2004 and 2005 that had a huge backyard and rested in a quiet neighborhood. The area had no historical significance that I'm aware of, but I've not researched anything since living there, so I'm not too sure. After moving in, I explored the backyard a couple of times, and I found a path out in the middle of the garden that looked old. If you followed it, it led to this old run-down shed, or at least remnants of some shed of some sort. I always felt like there was some connection with our house or property to this old run-down shed hidden in the woods too, but I could just never really explain it. My dad and I were not believers in ghosts or anything, as he was raised Catholic by his parents, and he raised me the same way. We didn't watch any paranormal shows, but we did watch a scary movie or two that we enjoyed once in a while. At the time my dad purchased this house, he got married shortly after that to his wife, and she brought along her younger son. They moved in with my dad, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Over the next year, their marriage was failing terribly, to say the least. Lots of fighting was occurring, and I was always filled in by my stepbrother when I came over on the weekends to visit. I'll never forget a night when I went into the kitchen and my stepbrother followed me in like usual. He discussed the possibility of divorce with my dad and his mum, but also brought up some really weird things that had been happening around the house. He described to me that he would be playing video games with his door open, and he kept seeing things out of the corner of his eye. He also said that he would hear someone walking around on the carpet in the hallway, but no one would be there. I immediately dismissed everything he told me, though, because I thought that he was just trying to scare me or something. Fast forward a couple of weeks later, and my dad's now ex-wife moved out of our house and took her son with her. We had some empty rooms in our house now, with one being right next to my bedroom. The house was laid out very long horizontally, if that makes sense. My bedroom and the guest was on one side of the house, the living room and the kitchen in between, and then the other side of the house had my dad's room and another guest room. There was just one long hallway that connected the two sides of the house, and I came to eventually despise it too. So I began to see things out of the corner of my eyes when I visited my dad too. Just sudden things moving, and by the time I looked there was nothing there. At night, I would hear sounds of what I didn't want to admit was footsteps in the hallways outside my bedroom, but I had to after a while. Just little weird things that eventually I couldn't ignore any longer. Finally, one weekend, I confront my dad about what I've been experiencing, just to have him confirm the experiences from him too. We began documenting things around the house in a Word document, just for reference, and I wish I still had it, but I lost it at some point. There were shadows, voices, footsteps, lights turning on and off without anyone even being there, and I would be lying if I said that I wasn't scared. I became terrified of the empty room next to my bedroom in particular, as I began to hear people walking around against the wall and talking softly in the room in the middle of the night. I would be so scared that I would stay up all night until the sun came up the next morning, and I blared my radio or TV to drown out the terrifying sounds that I could just never explain. As the activity heightened, I began to share my stories at school with my friends, who began to laugh at everything that I said. One weekend, I planned on having a friend to come see for herself the activity that was occurring in the house. She came inside and made her way to my room, and she dropped her bags off in my bedroom. We came into the living room, which was still very close to my bedroom, and she began to belittle the activity in the house, claiming that it wasn't real. A side note too, since I was terrified of the empty bedroom, I kept the door closed at all times when I was home. So she continued on making fun of me until we heard a doorknob in the hallway turn and the creak of a door open. You bet that I almost needed new pants when I peered down the hallway to find the door to the empty room was half open. The activity in the house escalated, in fact, to the point where my dad and I actually got a local paranormal team associated with TAPS to come and investigate for our peace of mind. And their findings coincided with ours too, and they mentioned that they believed it was all children spirits. Nothing bad that they can tell was present, and honestly, I never felt like they wanted to hurt me. The activity was always just really playful and was similar to children acting like they would to get attention or something. In fact, we actually ended up catching an EVP of a little girl's voice the weekend of the investigation, and that chilled my body to the core, and still does in fact. Anyway, the activity continued after the investigation too, and I became more restless. It became frustrating for me to visit my dad's house, in fact, and it was really taking a toll on my relationship with him and my personal health. I would be terrified to stay in the house alone, let alone stay the night for the weekend, and I know it's silly to still be scared over children ghosts, but I still don't know who or what they were. I stayed a typical weekend at my dad's, and this weekend, I was absolutely terrified with heightened levels of activity. And at that point, I was done. I was done being scared and keeping my rosary on my doorknob, and I was done being too scared to go to sleep. So one night, I came out into the dark hallway in the middle of the night, and I thrusted myself into the dark, empty room next to mine. I switched on the lights and yelled out forcefully, "You're not allowed to scare me anymore. You're not welcome here. You need to leave. You need to move on and go find your own family and leave me alone." My heart was pounding as I ran out of the room and quickly switched off the lights and slammed that door shut. What happened after this, I will never, ever forget. I began to dream that night, and it was not a typical dream. And I'm not sure what to call it, but when I was dreaming, I woke up in my room exactly as I left it when I fell asleep. I looked around my room and saw that my nightlight was on and my radio was still quietly playing. I mean, it literally looked exactly like my room at night, but somehow I knew that I was dreaming or something. So I looked towards my door and watched it slowly open to reveal these 3 children just standing in my doorway looking at me. There was an older girl, maybe around 10, a younger girl, maybe around 5 or 6, and a younger boy, maybe around 5 or 6 as well. And they just sat there, staring at me. And the best way I can describe their look towards me would be the look of people in the 1800s gave when they were taking a picture. They almost looked so sad, but also like they had no emotions at all or something. Their outfits looked to be late 1800s maybe, or early 1900s from what I remember. And they just sat there, staring at me for what seemed like an eternity. Until they just looked down the hallway, turned and walked away. That's where my dream ended, and I frantically woke up in a sweat to just find my room looking exactly like it did in the dream, but my door was closed. I never did get out of bed to check the hallway, and to be honest, I'm glad that I didn't. After that night, all the activity just pretty much ended as far as I can tell from my dad too. I never did hear anything again at that house, and the tenants after us reported no activity either. But to this day, I'm not sure what I encountered, or I'm not sure if I was actually having a dream or if it was real or not. I've always felt sensitive ever since that experience too, and I always feel like I occasionally have these odd dreams similar to what happened to me in that house. It was just so real, but I knew that I was sleeping. Anyway, let's just say that my dad and I, we definitely believe in ghosts now to this day, and we still can't explain what happened to us back then. This was back when I was 18 years old, and I'm 21 now, but I'll never forget this house as some of the weirdest experiences ever happened there, and it should be noted too that, 1, this is all true, though in my mind I may have just thought that it was creepier than it was. I'd like to know your opinions. And 2, our landlords left for a half-a-year vacation the day after renting us the place, and gave us some weird dude's number for any repairs and stuff. Anyway, so my brother, mother, and I moved into a new house. It had a main floor that you would walk into the living room upon opening the door. There was a hallway with a bathroom straight ahead, and on the left were the 2 bedrooms, and on the right another bedroom and an opening to the kitchen. The kitchen then had a backyard and an open doorway, with no door in it, to the basement stairs. This lack of door really struck me as odd because the basement was all done by the former owner by the time that we got there. It used to be an unfinished wreck, but the owner was some sort of lumberyard worker and was good with his hands or something, so it was done by the time that we got there. So the first room was all concrete with closet doors at the bottom of the stairs and a workbench with cupboards. All the windows down there had bars on them, and then you would walk up 2 stairs to a large open carpeted room with an office ceiling tiles to cover the insulation. However, the bathroom in the laundry room was a dingy tiled floor, with a cellar door to open it and 2 coat hooks on the wall. The toilet was busted up as well, and I know that this seems like tedious information, but trust me, it's all relevant. So, upon moving in, it seemed like a steal. My brother, who was 21, and my 18-year-old self were left alone a lot too. This was because my mother either worked late or would sometimes stay at her boyfriend's house, and it all seemed great to us. But I started noticing weird things in the house that kind of freaked me out. The first was that the cellar door in the basement bathroom seemed to have claw marks on it, but they were on the inside. And once I started having concerns about that, it led me to notice the marks from a lock that clearly used to be on the outside of the door. The claw marks were far too high for an animal, but I figured maybe it was just a really big dog or something that the old owner was an asshole to. A few days after being moved in, too, I heard a noise in my closet. But when I opened the door, there was a bunch of newspapers on the ground. It was extremely old, and when I looked up, I saw that there was a perfect square hole cut out of the ceiling. I poked my head up with a flashlight, and I couldn't see anything. I wasn't worried that it was a person or anything because, to be quite honest, it was all just rafters up there. Between the rafters were a bunch of old newspapers too, which were apparently used for insulation a long time ago. But that gave me an idea of just how old the house was. And this made me pretty curious about the house, so I started investigating it. I checked each closet and I didn't find anything in the hallway or guest room, but when I checked in my mother's room, my brother had the basement room, I found what seemed to be ceiling. Upon pressing on them though, a square of ceiling popped up and it was like some sort of hidden way to the attic or something, and looked as though there was a way to pull yourself up or something. I told my brother about this, along with the claw marks, and he agreed that it was creepy but shrugged it off. I have a pretty wild imagination sometimes, so to be honest, I didn't blame him. So, a few nights pass and I'm pretty settled about things, and my brother just got home from work. We started talking in the kitchen while we were making ourselves dinner, and then all of a sudden we hear this loud banging from the basement, right on the bottom of the stairs. My brother and I both grabbed the nearest thing that we could find to defend ourselves with, as we were sure that someone had broken in or something. When we get downstairs, the closet doors were all open and the banging had just stopped. We searched everywhere down there, but we couldn't find anyone. My brother then said to me, "Check it out," and the cabinet above the workbench had been shifted. He pulled on the bottom and we realized that it wasn't fastened to the wall. It was just kind of hanging there. He opened the cupboards and tried to punch the backing open, but it just fell right off. Like there was a false backing or something to it. He shined a light down the dark opening in the wall, but it just seemed to stretch on forever. My brother came back out and said that he found these sheets of white powder, that he had brought some with him. God knows why he pulled them out. I mean, it could have been anything, but we closed the cabinet and I put a bar of wood in the handle so that it wouldn't open again. Then we called our mum and our family friend Jim. Jim was actually a big guy and he knew a lot about the city and the construction there. He told us that the powder was probably just baking soda, most likely to cover up some sort of musty smell down there, and that we could actually have a piece of history in our basement. He said that the city used to have a bunch of underground tunnels in this part of town, and that, though most are blocked off, the wind could have still blown through and created that banging noise. I must admit that it was comforting, but still, it was really creepy, and it didn't really explain why all the cupboards were open. And I mean, this wasn't the only instance too. Things would just open that weren't before. We would still hear noises all the time too, and there was always just this feeling in that basement that someone was watching you. So much so that my brother moved into the guest room and out of the basement. It got to the point that my mother was so sick of hearing us complain that she flat out asked the landlords about the previous owner and told them what we told her. And apparently, he was under investigation for a few crimes, but nothing was ever really proven. Well, as you can imagine, after all of this, we moved out of that house pretty damn quickly. This was all over the span of about a month and a few weeks, and I don't ever want to know what made those noises in the house, or why the landlords just left so quick, or why they gave us the number of that super creepy repairman, or what the hell went on in that house. It makes me queasy to think about it still sometimes, but enough time has passed that I thought it may be of interest to you guys, and I felt comfortable enough to share it. I guess it really shows that you can just never really know the history of a place that you may live in. I've always been into the paranormal world. Ever since I was a little kid, one of my favorite things to do was watching horror movies or paranormal TV shows. I used to get scared very, very easily, but that didn't matter to me. I guess I just liked feeling the adrenaline in my body until I got legit goosebumps. Luckily, or possibly not, 2 years ago, I went through a lot of personal stuff and I stopped being frightened of everything involving the paranormal and all sorts of things like that. And since I've always loved that kind of thing and I wasn't scared anymore, I started watching and hearing and reading paranormal stuff at all times, like literally all day, every day just about. Before I stopped being frightened though, I had already experienced some paranormal stuff through the years, but maybe I was just too scared to admit it or openly talk about it. And maybe I'll start writing about them as well, but I wanted to start with this particular experience, and I wanted to share this one. Since I had been involved in paranormal stuff for the last 2 years as well, I guess I kind of attracted all this type of stuff to myself, and things started happening to me. I'm pretty sure that the more you're involved in this stuff, the more vulnerable and susceptible you get to it all. Anyway, so this happened about 2 months ago. I was in San Diego with 3 of my closest friends because we were attending a concert, so we booked a hotel room for all of that. The night before the show, we were pretty tired and we wanted to sleep in early so we could rest as much as we could for the show, so I went to sleep in the same bed as my best friend, and on the other bed, a nightstand separated them, were my 2 other friends. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly, and in the corner of the room, I saw this huge black figure that was just staring at me, directly in the eye, and I just sensed this super heavy or dark bad energy around the room or something. I knew instantly that something was really wrong, and my best friend woke up and she was really confused because I grabbed her arm and squeezed it so hard that she started hurting. I don't really recall this act, but she told me to calm down and to stop accusing her of things that she didn't do. She told me that I was telling her to stop staring at me and scaring me, to just let me sleep, and I don't recall telling her any of that, and the only thing that I do remember was seeing this shadow in the room instead, and it was staring right into my eyes. After all the confusion and shouting, we calmed down and we got back into bed, and at this point, none of our other 2 friends had woken up, and they were still sleeping deeply. Admittedly, I was really, really scared, and I think that I've never been more scared in my life, in fact, but I really didn't want to scare her by telling her that I'd just seen something, so I let her go back to sleep. So after a few minutes, I started telling myself to not let this thing get to me and that I wasn't scared anymore. I mean, I know for a fact that if you build up a wall in your mind and don't let it get to you, it really won't, and these things will just go away, so I did that with everything that I had left in me. But as I was telling all of myself this, I sensed a second wave of super heavy dark energy, and this energy was going towards one of my other 2 friends who was sleeping, the one who was just across the nightstand, in fact, and I knew that this thing had something to do with her. I don't even know how, but I just knew, and there was just this connection, and it was so strong, and just looking at her made me really uncomfortable and scared. A few minutes go by, and I repeated to myself the things that I said before and tried to build a bigger wall in my head, and I did, and eventually all the feelings just went away, and I finally got back to sleep. The morning after, we were getting ready to go to this concert, and I started talking to my best friend about the night before, and I told her and my 2 other friends that I had seen something, and before I got into any details about what I had experienced, the friend that I had sensed this connection with this thing about approached me and It told me right to my face that what I had experienced was because of her. That she knew that she allegedly had a demon with her, and sometimes it manifested itself, and that she was really sorry about it, and that I shouldn't be afraid of it. That she wasn't afraid anymore since she had dealt with it for years. The craziest thing about this experience, though, is that I didn't tell her or anybody at that point that I knew that there was a connection between her and this thing that night. I still can't explain how I knew or sensed the connection between them, but the thing is that I knew that it was just true. Later, she also told us that when she was 12 years old, she actually played with a Ouija board by herself, and she thinks that that's where this thing attached itself to her. Back in 2012, I was a senior in high school. At one time, I babysat the infant son of a couple who were close family friends of ours. I put the baby down to bed early, probably 8 o'clock or so, I'd say. He slept upstairs while I chilled downstairs in the living room, just watching TV with the baby monitor nearby. The parents said that they'd be back around midnight or so. At around 11 o'clock, I heard the baby screaming through the baby monitor, and I don't mean crying, I mean screaming. I worked at a daycare all through high school, and even to this day, I have never heard a baby scream like this. It didn't sound like he was upset or crying for food or a diaper change or anything. The scream made the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stand up. Even as I type this now, it kind of makes me feel sick. It was as if my instincts could pick up on some kind of primal terror inflicted within. Anyway, I ran up the stairs, obviously, opened the door of the baby's room and turned on the lights. He was there, just standing in the crib holding himself up on the rail with one hand. His other hand was pointing at the closet, still screaming. I picked him up and it calmed down a bit as I patted him on the back. I brought him downstairs with me as his parents were going to be home within the hour anyway, and I didn't have the courage to check the closet. I'm not ashamed to say that it just really freaked me out, as it was just me and this baby in the house. So, the parents arrived home around midnight, as they said. There was some confusion, frustration as to why the baby was still awake with me downstairs. When they questioned me about this, I told them what had happened. I honestly thought that I'd sound like an idiot, and was kind of worrying about how I'd explain it leading up to their arrival. However, when I said what happened, the mother's expression just dropped. She shook her head and just welled up, obviously distraught, and took her son upstairs without a word. Weird, because remember, these are family friends, and we're usually on good terms. But the father apologized on her behalf and for what I had experienced, and he shared that his wife had been seeing the ghost of a Civil War soldier standing at the foot of her bed. He had never seen it, of course, but he knew that her fear was real and that they just didn't know how to explain it. I never experienced anything paranormal myself that night. However, I've never seen anyone react with such palpable fear and distress for seemingly no reason ever since. The way the baby screamed and the way the mother's demeanor just immediately changed when I said what happened, what still gives me the creeps. Anyway, I wanted to share this story with all of you because it's the only semi-paranormal encounter that I've ever had, and I would just really love to hear your thoughts. When I was 8, I would walk home from my town home approximately 10 minutes away from my school. I would be home by myself every day for about an hour and a half, I'd say, because my parents worked and my older brother went to a different school and all that. I always used this alone time to sink into my couch and watch cartoons before my family came home and took over. I actually really enjoyed the alone time, in fact. Also, I was raised in a very Christian home and was very sheltered. I would get into trouble watching Power Rangers sometimes, in fact, because the bad guys were just too evil. I remember being taught that after you die, you either go to heaven or hell. You don't get a say whether you're going or not, so that means that there's no such thing as ghosts. Or so I thought anyway. So one day, after school, I come home to the same routine, but this time, standing in the corner was a dark figure, the height of the doorframe, just staring at me. It looked like a textbook Grim Reaper minus a scythe, and it had a long black tattered robe with skeletal features showing. The most disturbing thing was its grin, though, and it looked like a skeleton, but wore a long grin. Keep in mind that I had never heard of the Nightmare Before Christmas or anything else that I could relate this to. Of course, I was startled by such a horrific sight, but I literally didn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, I was young and all. I remember saying out loud, "Wow, my imagination is just really jacked up." I would just keep calling myself a stupid little kid with a stupid imagination, and it helped me make sense of what I saw, and it made it easier to deal with because I saw something, but a ghost didn't exist. It just had to be my imagination, I thought. I saw it every day after that, too. It would never say a word, but if I looked at it, it would lean its head at me as if it were trying to say, "I see you too." It always left when my family came home, but I saw this thing every day for about 3 months straight. And it started to get more aggressive the more uncomfortable I became. I questioned my sanity every day, of course, just telling myself that it just didn't make sense. I'm seeing a ghost, but how? Because ghosts aren't real. I would say that I don't believe in ghosts because that's what I was taught, but that's a ghost. I didn't understand anything and I was confused, and as days went by, I became just more scared every day. But then, this thing just started cutting me off in places. I would be so uncomfortable that I would want to go to my room upstairs, and then it would move slowly as if underwater and then quickly zip as if teleporting onto the stairway, just leaning over the staircase while looking at me in my face to block me from going to my room. I was literally stuck to my little corner of my couch with this smiling skeleton that wanted something from me. Well, or so I thought. And that's the best way that I could relate how it moved. It was kind of like a ghost from the movie 13 Ghosts. That's actually pretty spot on, in fact. Anyway, I never told my parents or anyone else what I was seeing. I was afraid my parents wouldn't believe a stupid little kid like me, and honestly, I was just afraid of getting in trouble. Plus, it even crossed my mind that this whole situation was just weird. I thought to myself that my brother would just call me gay and tell everyone to make fun of me. But one day, I slowly walked home with about 6 inches of snow on the ground, and I came home and this thing, like every day, was waiting for me. I sat on the couch in fear like always, but this time, it zipped in front of my face and it took its hands and shrouded them over my face as if it wanted to grab me, and then zipped back. For the first time, I screamed as loud as I could and just ran outside. And eventually, my parents came home and found me outside just sitting in the snow and crying. My parents obviously asked me what was wrong, and the first thing that I said was, "I know I'm a stupid little kid with a stupid imagination and you're just never going to believe me." But after I told my parents, I expected them to look at each other in disbelief and make me look under my bed for monsters and stuff. They turned to each other and said in a stern voice, "Why didn't you tell us?" And that scared me more than they knew, because they sounded like they knew something. My parents had never told me anything that would scare me before, but this time, my parents told me that they would tell me the God-honest truth as if I was grown. They told me that the people that lived in the house before us had a little girl that was apparently demon-possessed in our house and took her own life. And now, this demon allegedly wanted me. My parents immediately poured baby oil into a cap and prayed over it and put a dab of it in the shape of a cross over every door and window in the house. And after that, I saw it outside of my kitchen window looking in sometimes. That was the first time that I saw it outside too, and then a week after that again, and 2 weeks after that as well, and then after that, I just never saw it again. Whether anyone believes me or not is not really important to me. Whether it was my crazy 8-year-old brain like I thought, or something paranormal, I don't know what it was, but I saw it for 3 months straight, and no one can take that away from me. I'm one of those guys who likes to think of himself as a grounded, no-nonsense person. Coming from a programming background, acting on logic is in my nature, but I just cannot make sense of these events using conventional logic. I'll get straight to the events that occurred a few months ago. So, I'd been promoted to a more stressful position, which led to a heavier workload, and eventually, stress and insomnia kicked in. After a terrible night's sleep, I battled with the decision whether I should go into work or not. Feeling guilty about not going in, I was managing the department at the time, I phoned in with an honest excuse to the staff that I was meeting that day and tried to get some more sleep. While sleeping, I vaguely remember a guilt-driven dream about going into work at my normal hour that day. When I finally turned up, about lunchtime I'd say, I alluded to my lateness to my receptionist, and she looked confused and said, "But you were here earlier this morning." I said that she must have been mistaken and was probably thinking about yesterday, a day when I did come in early, but she insisted that I was in and even got another employee to back her up. He said something like, "We both saw you this morning. I remember it clearly." I just kind of laughed it off, leaving the receptionist and myself confused. I proceeded to the room that I had my appointment in, and there was no such confusion with the rest of the staff. I told them of the receptionist's confusion, and we laughed it off too. The jokes must have made it back to her, because as I proceeded with the meeting, the receptionist knocked and came in and adamantly stated that she had seen me, and she wanted to clear it up. I guess that she just didn't want to look crazy in front of everyone, and I could tell by her attitude that she was 100% convinced that she had seen me come in this morning. With a bit of a joking attitude, and to clear up the matter for good, I called my fiancé in front of everyone on loudspeaker, who was home all morning. I asked, "Can you remember what time I got up, and I didn't leave the house sleep driving or anything, did I?" She corroborated my story, and the receptionist proceeded to turn a slightly paler shade. I then became convinced that she and the other employee who was at the reception saw something, but I felt like I'd embarrassed her, so I just kind of left it at that for a bit. This actually became a bit of a running joke for weeks, though. I would say, I wish I could be in 2 places at a time with this workload, etc., and it just seemed like the best way to deal with it at the time, but about a month later came the second event. So, my fiancée came into the living room on a quiet Sunday, looking very confused. She explained that she had followed me into my home office room from the kitchen. She apparently saw me entering wearing completely different clothes to what I had on that day, and wanted to ask why I'd changed clothes. According to her, I was wearing my grey t-shirt, although I had a green t-shirt on while sitting on the sofa. She again was adamant of the event, and she walked into the office and saw that there was no one there. The hair stood up on my neck as I remembered the incident at the workplace, and although I don't necessarily believe in such things, I started searching Google for similar paranormal experiences. I read some stuff about doppelgangers, and contrary to my usual logical attitude, I never wore that t-shirt ever again. The third event pertains to a recent dream that synchronizes to my fiancé's. I remember bits of the dream, especially the very emotional part. There was a playful, childlike character in my dream, much like me when I was young. I somehow knew it was my brother, though, and I asked my mum why my brother was not grown up. She started to cry in my dream, and with great sadness said he never had the chance to grow up. I woke up emotionally rattled from the dream, most of which I can't remember. I blurted out to my fiancée, though, that I just had a dream that I had a brother, expecting a dismissive reply from her. I often share my dreams when I can remember them with her, which is pretty rare, mind you, but we usually just laugh at them and move on. Instead, as she woke up to my statement, she sleepily replied, "I had a dream that you told me that you had a brother, and that we were on a boat." Again, there were chills up my spine, but there was nothing about a boat in my dream that I can remember anyway. We ended up just putting it down to talking to each other in our sleep or something, and it was the only rational explanation that we could come up with. It's worth noting too that around the time of these events, two significant events happened in my life. One was actually having a drug relapse fueled by my insomnia. I'm actually an alcoholic addict. I've been clean for 7 years and clean today now too. The other was a massive life change involving leaving my job to set up what became a successful business with far less stress than my 9-to-5 job. Anyhow, I've probably rambled too much at this point, and I suppose that I'm looking for opinions outside of my normal framework of thinking and to just offload this story to get it off my chest. Thanks for listening to my story, and any feedback would be much appreciated. When I was 18, I was lying on my stomach on my bed playing my 3DS. All my lights were on, and I was gearing up to set my game aside to actually go to sleep. Before I did, though, I started to hear this horrible sobbing. It was honestly the saddest, most gut-wrenching sound that I've ever heard, and it sounded like a man just completely losing it, forgetting all the emotional training that he'd had in his life and just letting it all go. It was like a high-pitched male howling and crying, and it was just so painful just to listen to it. I immediately thought that it was my dad or something. He sleeps just above me, separate from my mother due to his snoring, and my grandfather has been really sick for years too. I figured that my grandpa must have just passed away or something. I didn't think much of ghosts or anything and just left my room at that point, went up the stairs and woke my mother up. But by the point that I had left the room, the sobbing had stopped, and when I passed my dad's room to tell my mum, I couldn't hear the crying anymore. Again, I didn't think anything of it for whatever reason and just figured that he was gaining control of himself. I woke my mum up and told her that I think Grandpa died. She got this look on her face like, "Oh shit," and got up. I thought I was emotionally gearing up for the death of a family member, so I left her to it and started just messing around in the kitchen to get a drink and to just keep myself busy. I heard my mum go into my dad's room and could hear him go, I got this kind of feeling in my gut that said he was asleep, and I began to get fearful at that point. But I just kind of brushed it off as me reading too many unresolved mystery stories or something. My mum came out after a little bit and looked at me really quizzically. She said, "Everything's okay. He was asleep." At this point, I started to shake and I began to cry immediately. I was shaking so bad that I couldn't actually stand, and my mother had to come over and hold me up. I mean, I knew exactly what I had heard and was also letting out all of this fearful energy that I'd been penning up at once. It took quite a while for her to calm me down and to stop me from crying. I don't remember feeling scared or full of adrenaline at the time, but I do remember crying and shaking after all the events. My memory is pretty hazy after that too, and I actually think that I just went to bed and just went to sleep without much issue after that. Why it didn't bother me more at the time, I don't know. My dad said in the morning that he had apparently left a World War II documentary on and insisted that it was just that. The only issue is that I have slept under him since I was 11, and he usually falls asleep in the middle of some documentary or other. I only occasionally hear these movies through the ground, and it's always kind of quiet. Nothing I've ever heard has ever been that loud and that clear. Looking back on it, in fact, it sounded more like it was in my room than coming from the floor above, let alone on that night. Anyway, none of the other noises that might have been from the documentary made it through the floorboards that night. That much I can guarantee. My mum joked that it was his snoring, but we ran into the exact same issues. But some of the people that I've told this to say it was sleep paralysis or just plain old dreaming. But for one, though, I've experienced sleep paralysis before, and every single one has been purely auditory for me, meaning that my eyes cannot be open at the same time. I've yet to come across an exception for this, so the fact that my eyes were open and I was actually playing a game at the time, it kind of wipes the idea out for me. Also, again, I wasn't even properly laying down and my lights weren't off. I wasn't even sleepy really, so I definitely wasn't sleepy enough to just fall asleep in that position. Also, during the same week, I was home alone with my dog on my lap once. I was sitting on the couch upstairs, just facing away from the stairway, and I heard someone running up and down about 4 steps at the top really deliberately about 4 times. Again, I had this weird non-issue with it at the time. I didn't really feel that afraid, and there was no adrenaline rush or anything. I did grab a knife though, but I still wasn't scared when I was doing it. It's only as I'm sharing it that I realize how weird that sounds, but I didn't feel scared at all. My body just went through the motions of kind of being scared in both situations, like grabbing a knife and checking for things and stuff like that, but I didn't actually feel fear. The sound of the sobbing, though, has always just really stuck with me. It truly was the saddest sound that I've ever heard, and I'll never forget it, ever. I do go back and forth on whether it was just a high-pitched male sobbing or possibly a female. Interestingly enough, though, it being female is a slightly more juicy aspect, as we actually had a woman kill herself in our garage back in the 1950s after a divorce, and we've joked about her haunting our house for years. But thinking back on it, it definitely sounded male because my immediate reaction to it was, oh, it's my dad. And I remember it sounded especially sad because it was like someone just completely letting go of social norms or whatever. I never had any more paranormal experiences in my house after this. It was just those 2 specific instances in that couple of day time span. Also, just for the record, I actually don't believe in the paranormal, but I also think that it's stupid to believe that there are things that we just can't explain. So, these experiences have always been in a weird middle ground for me. Anyway, thanks for listening. So this happened only a couple of months ago, and I'm still quite on edge about it. I had a group of friends that lived about an hour and a half away from me, and I would frequently go and hang out with them. The drive never really bothered me, but after this particular night, I've now come to dread it. So, I first noticed the car about 20 minutes into my trip home. It was about 2 a.m, so not many cars were on the road, and this guy was practically riding my bumper, which I thought was strange because there were no other cars out. I quickly wrote it off though, and just thought that this guy was a bit of an arsehole and turned back into my music. The time on the freeway is about 55 minutes, I'd say, and he was behind me the entirety of it. When I saw that he was getting off at the same exit, I must admit that I got a little bit anxious, but I told myself that I was just being paranoid and that there was nothing to worry about. I was heading home as I normally would until I noticed that this car was making every turn right behind me. I started turning down random roads too to test my theory of them following me, and just as I suspected, they were trailing behind me. I stopped going towards my house at this point and started just driving randomly, trying to think of what to do. I tried whipping down roads at the last second, but that didn't work either. I actually ended up driving through red lights and stop signs because I was scared of what would happen if I stopped. I was desperate at this point, so I called the police and told them that I was being followed for over an hour now. I gave them a description of the car and my location, and the dispatcher told me to drive to the police station and there would be officers waiting in the parking lot there. And as I turned into the parking lot, what do you know? The car sped off. One of the police cruisers immediately flipped on their lights and followed them too, and I stayed at the police station and gave my statement. I also followed up with the police station after not getting a call for some time, and the officer that I spoke to said that he wouldn't go into detail, but apparently there was a lot of meth found in the man's car, along with some very sharp weapons, and he is now in jail. So I'm an ex-long-haul trucker, and I wasn't on the road for very long collectively. I don't have any ghost Route 66 stories or anything like that, but I do recall one night in particular. So, basically, this is what happened. I was driving through Montana headed east, and my company had miscalculated my mileage, so I requested an emergency fuel up. I got a response with the nearest gas station that I could get approved at. It wasn't exactly close too, so I turn off the main highway and head toward my stop. Mind you, it's completely pitch black at this point. There's no moon, no city light, and I haven't seen any headlights for about an hour now. So I'm cruising down the highway and I see something in the middle of the road at the furthest extent of my headlights. So I slow down, naturally, as I approach it. When I come to pass it, I get one good glance at it, and I immediately slam on my brakes as I pass right in the middle of the highway. All I could think was, what the fuck did I just see? So I back up looking into my mirror until I see it's a red silhouette in my brake lights. I pull my brakes and put on my jacket and grab my flashlight and hop out to take a look. I walk to the back of my trailer and put my light on it, and there it was. It was a headless, skinless, mangled corpse. Honestly, I froze and my jaw dropped. I didn't know what I was looking at, and I just stood there in the middle of the highway, in the cold, stagnant air, the only sound being the hum of my truck 50 feet back, just watching the steam rise from this pile of meat. There was no fur, there was no clothing, just a fully intact ribcage with a mess of other miscellaneous bones attached by ligaments. I honestly debated calling the police, as the ribcage looked big enough for someone even my size, but I looked at my phone and I had 0 cell service, and the nearest town was about 50 miles out. When I put my phone away, I flashed my light around, and standing at the end of the road were a handful of coyotes just staring at me. And then they started coming through the fence and trotting my direction. I figured that this is the part where I get back into the truck before I get into a situation. So I did, and I continued on my way. I still to this day do not know if it was human or something else. I mean, it kind of looked human, whatever it was, and whatever had happened to it, I was almost a witness of, I'm pretty sure. I convinced myself that it was more than likely just a deer and was hit by another truck like my own at the highway speeds or something. That would definitely do significant damage, but in retrospect, I've never seen roadkill missing its flesh before. So, yeah, I don't know what the fuck it was, but man, it was creepy. This happened about 2 weeks ago at a rest stop. My girlfriend and I are driving back to Los Angeles from Arizona, and stop at one on the 10E just after the valley. It's about 2 a.m, but I really have to pee at this point, and she does too. As we pull in, there's a good amount of trucks on one side and cars on our side, but I don't see any people. And it's just got a really creepy vibe about it, and my girlfriend decides that she can wait to pee, so I head to the bathroom while she stays in the car with the doors locked. In the bathroom is a barefoot, very dirty man just sitting on the floor under the sinks watching videos on his phone. That was really weird, but I live in Hollywood, so I just avoid eye contact, do my business, and then just leave. But the girlfriend decides that she does need to go after all, so I walk her to the bathroom and wait outside. There's still no human activity in the rest stop apart from that weird guy sitting under the sink. So we get back into the little Subaru and grab some snacks from the trunk and get in the car. The doors are locked and the engine is on, but we're just sitting there for a minute or two just preparing to go when I catch a glimpse of headlights in my mirror. But there's an old 70s massive sedan just slowly passing behind us, and I can see that it's filled with 4 or 5 men. But their windows are down and they pull into the spot immediately next to us. Mind you, I parked nowhere near any other cars, but they pulled up right beside us. Before they came to a stop, my spidey senses began to tingle and I jammed my car into reverse and flew backwards as I heard their driver yelling, "Hey," to get our attention. And then they put their car into reverse to back up in front of me and block me from leaving too. But thankfully, I'm driving a new Subaru versus their old chunky sedan from the 70s, and without taking an extra beat, I floor it and swerve to avoid them while they back up. We booked it out of the stop, and I did a good 90 on the 10 for a few miles after that. I honestly can't say for sure what would have happened if we stayed, or if we had just let them stop us to ask us questions or whatever, but to be quite honest with you, I don't think that they were there to ask any questions. I can't say for sure what would have happened if we had stayed and talked to the guys, but in all honesty, I don't think that they were there to ask for directions. So my boyfriend and I were visiting a few friends in Richmond, Virginia. We went with another couple and decided to get an Airbnb together. The other couple that we went with picked out the Airbnb, but they hadn't really been to the RVA before, so the place they picked was about 15 or 20 minutes outside of the city centre. It was a bit of a pain in the arse, I admit, but it wasn't a big deal. The neighbourhood was nice and the house was okay, so all was good. When we got to the house, it seemed really, well, I can't really describe it. It was nice enough, and we were only staying for a weekend, and the owner even left us some banana bread, but there was just this odd vibe about it. A bit of a creepy vibe. For example, when I put our stuff in our bedroom, I opened up the closet and there was nothing in there but a chair. Not like a fold-up chair, but like a small child's chair, facing the bed from the closet. There were no hangers, no other linens, no towels, just this small chair in an empty closet. I know that that's reading into it, and it doesn't sound creepy really, but it was just weird and had a weird vibe about it. Anyway, I brushed it off and we decided to settle in and then go and meet up with some friends in the city. Day turned into night and we all had a bit of a drink and decided to call it an evening at around 1:30 a.m. The 4 of us head back to the house and we all just went to bed. So usually, when I drink, there's nothing in the world that will wake me up. My head hits the pillow and that is where I still remain until the sun comes up. So, I don't know why it didn't happen this particular night. Maybe it was the feel of the house, but I woke up at around 3 in the morning to a quiet giggle. Like a grown man just giggling. I thought maybe my boyfriend was just giggling in his sleep, but then the giggling started getting louder, and it sounded like it was coming from outside our window, in fact. But the window was actually located behind the bed and above our heads, so I quietly snuck up to see if I could see anything, and there was nothing. But there was no one out there, but it went quiet when I looked, and the giggling had stopped. So I was about to just go back to sleep, but then it started back up again. And this time, I knew that it wasn't my boyfriend, and I knew that it wasn't the other couple too. The giggling grew louder and louder too until it was just full-blown hysterical laughter right outside of our window at 3 a.m. I felt my boyfriend's hand clench mine, and I didn't even know that he was awake. I asked him, "Did you bring your gun?" And he said, "No, but I have a knife." He asked if I saw anything out there, and I said no, I couldn't, and the laughing stopped after about 15 minutes. We stayed up until about 4 a.m. just looking outside the window, making sure that the laughter didn't come back, and when we did finally go back to sleep, We woke up the next morning and we asked the people if they heard anything, and they said no. In fact, they thought that we were kind of crazy. Well, one of them even suggested that I dreamt it. But how did my boyfriend and I both dream that there was just some random person laughing their heads off outside of our bedroom window? I can't tell what's creepier, to be honest. The fact that we heard that at 3 a.m. in this creepy house right next to our window, or that when I looked outside, there was just nothing there. I guess you can chalk it up to my not being able to see it. Or maybe this person was directly under our window. But why would someone do that? Why would someone just stay for 15 minutes outside of a house giggling and laughing, and then just presumably leave? Nothing happened after that, and we went back home, but to this day, my boyfriend and I still bring it up as one of the creepiest things to ever happen to us. I don't know why that guy was there, and if he was trying to maybe bait me to open my window or something, but I'm sure glad that I never found out. This story isn't mine, it's actually my grandmother's. And man, were things different in the 50s. This story is actually from her perspective of the event, as she told me. But before I get into it, here's some background information. This was February of 1956. My grandma was 18 at the time and in her freshman year at a large well-known state university in the Northeast Division of the Midwest US. She describes this time in college as the most freedom that she'd ever had, even with her very strict curfew for girls in particular, and an upsetting amount of racism and sexism that fueled school culture both from faculty and from students. The school also had a very secretive approach to matters of crime on campus. So, that's the background, and now to the story. So I was in my first few months of the winter semester when I'd come down with Hong Kong flu that had been going around on campus. I remember hating every second of it, especially because I had to get my very first shot of penicillin. We had a lot more space on campus than there is now in those days, so in order to prevent my roommate from getting sick, they had me boarding in a different room that was on the first floor of my actual dorm room, only in a new wing that was still having the finishing touches added to it. I had unpacked my belongings for my stay until I was no longer contagious and decided to do some homework since my stomachache was keeping me up anyway. From my room, I could see maintenance workers doing their jobs and getting the additional rooms ready, due to the fact that the flu was running rampant on campus and there was going to be a greater need for convalescent rooms for students to recover in without getting others sick. I'd been sitting at my desk just doing my homework with hair curlers in and my pajama shirt on and underwear. After a few hours of homework, I realized it was about 10 o'clock, so I decided to get some rest and continue tomorrow. I'm not sure how long I was asleep, but out of nowhere, my locked door was open and the lights were turned on. I immediately woke up thinking that there was some sort of fire on campus or emergency or something. I held the cover up to my chin, sitting up to see this man who seemed to be in his late 40s closing the door behind him as he walked into my room. As I heard the door shut and lock, I then realized that an emergency alert was not on this man's agenda for the night. I thought it was really odd that he had turned the lights on because it allowed me to notice every single detail about this man. He walked towards me, putting his finger over his lips, which led me to notice how awful his complexion was and how bright red his hair color was. He was wearing a suede rust-colored bomber jacket and these green corduroy pants. As he was walking towards me, the only thought that could form in my brain was how I was not about to let this man see me in my pajama shirt and undies. He seemed to walk towards me in a slow motion sort of way. As he got near me, I realized that he was carrying an unusually sharp screwdriver with him. But for some reason, in my panicked state, all I could think about was him seeing me in my pajama shirt and underwear, so I decided to engage with this man. I said to him, "What are you doing in here? I'm very sick and you're going to get sick too." He said, "Just be quiet and you won't get hurt." At this point, he's right beside me in my twin-size bed holding the screwdriver to my throat. I held the covers as close to my face as possible because, my pajamas and all again. I kept going on about how I had Hong Kong flu, saying that he was going to get sick, when all of a sudden, he just snapped at me, pushing harder into my neck with this screwdriver. He interrupted my speech on contagious airborne illness with a harsh, "Shut up, you stupid little girl. Be quiet and let me see your body." I don't know why, but for some reason, I decided to stay on course with my original story of not screaming, but instead just talking his ear off about all the different ways that he could be getting sick right now, and how that would be such a shame and all. He looked at me with this puzzled look on his face as to why I wasn't letting him get a single word in off his "shut up" interjections, regardless of how many times he threatened me. I then noticed that his grip on me began to slowly loosen, and he eventually made his way walking backwards before dashing out of my room. I know for a fact that I heard him exit through the fire door exit next to me, but found it odd that the alarm hadn't gone off. At that moment, the seriousness of the situation flooded me, and I just burst into tears, running and screaming towards the RA who had been napping in the office. From there, the campus police were called, but because of their blatant disregard for my account of the events, they told me that I was being hysterical and that it was only a bad dream. As soon as I had told them that he had escaped through the fire door but the alarm hadn't gone off, my story was chalked up to me being over-emotional over a bad dream or something. I didn't expect to hear anything else regarding this, in fact, and I hadn't told my parents out of fear that they wouldn't let me finish off my degree. They were never happy about me attending college because they felt that they were spending money for me to just become a housewife. However, about a week later, I had campus police come to me asking me to come with them. I had no idea why they needed me and hardly spoke to me the entire time, in fact. All they told me to do was walk up to a bench full of men, identify the one that I had dreamt about, and leave. It wasn't until nearly a year later that I found out what that was. Apparently, a week later, a young woman had been found dead, sexually assaulted, and covered in stab wounds, specifically around her neck. Me identifying my dream assailant was the confirmation they needed to link him to her murder. This man had been hired as an electrician for the school's new buildings and wings, so he had access to the keys of the newly renovated room that I had been in, which explained how he got into the locked room. This also explained how he was able to exit the fire door with no alarm sounding. I'm guessing that he did what electricians do and found a way to disarm it. I was left in the dark about all of this and only found out from begging my RA to explain at least some details regarding the case. All I know now is that this man was found guilty and was sent to the state hospital for the criminally insane. I know nothing else really. Looking back, I guess I was lucky in that moment. My only concern was that I didn't want this man to see me in my pajamas, because had I recognized the real danger I was in, who knows how I would have reacted or how he would have responded. Anyways, my grandma was unable to answer any more questions regarding the details of what happened to him because the school was very strict about keeping this quiet. They didn't want the word getting around that it was someone that they had hired. They did their best to handle this as secretively as possible so that other students or parents weren't alarmed, and my grandma was sent on her way, never really informed on the case after this, and was never updated on the whereabouts of her little visitor for the remainder of her time at the university. So, the following story happened on the night of Friday the 13th. Me and my girlfriend and 3 other friends were at the time tripping through Europe. Usually, we tried to find a camping ground where we could safely set up our tents for the night, but since some locations we visited were really off-grid, we sometimes just resorted to sleeping in the wilderness, so to speak. We did this about 3 times without, despite the usually creepy surroundings, any significant incidences. The last night of our trip, however, man, it gave us a bit of a scare. So, our last camping location of our trip was located in the Jura area of France, near a river with, on the opposite side of that river, a wildlife park. We planned on only staying one night, but since most of us were tired from the travelling around for 2 weeks, we decided to make it 2 nights in order to make sure that we had enough rest. So, We arrived at the place and everything seemed okay. It was a densely wooded area with mostly unpaved roads, of which most were dead ends, and it seemed to be really quiet, a really unpopulated place. But while driving through the woods, we found a road that led to the riverbed. As we drove down, we noticed loud drunk people were already there, and I jumped out of the car with 2 others to ask, in my best possible French, these people what they were doing there. They answered that they were fishing there and that they would be staying there for a couple of nights. But then I asked if it was okay if we could stay with them for the night, and even though they said it was okay, we decided to search for another spot because we all felt that these people were not the kind of guys that you wanted to spend the night with, if you catch my drift. We jumped back into the car, and after debating what we should do, we decided to drive further along the road in order to see if there were any other roads that led to the riverbed. After only a couple of minutes of driving through this rough terrain, we found a road that led to the most beautiful place that, honestly, I've ever seen. As it was already dark at this point in time, we didn't see what the road was like when we drove down. So at this moment, we hardly noticed the mud and the rocks sticking out of it. After a bumpy descent, we reached our beautiful spot and set up our tents, and everything was perfect. The following day, we were just relaxing and swimming and just having a good time when me and the main driver of the group, Joey, we decided to go to a store to get some snacks and drinks and whatnot. As we were driving up the road, we noticed something that we hadn't seen the night before. Mud and a single giant rock were blocking our path. After discussing the issue, we decided to dig the bastard out, and we hoped that after we did this, we could continue driving up the road. As we were digging, a man and his dog came down the road with an old SUV and saw us struggling with the rock. He seemed friendly and told us that he was a local that wanted to go for a swim and offered to tow us out of there. As he was doing so, he told us that he had towed many people out of there before and that we should park the car on a less steep part of the road, which was a lot farther back from our camping spot, mind you, when we got back from the store. When our car was towed to a more drivable part of the road, the man took off to swim at another spot. I know that this seems trivial, but according to my friends, this is an important part of the story. So we went to get our groceries, and when we arrived, we parked our car near the spot the man had advised us to park. We took our things and walked down the road to find our friend had achieved the impossible. He actually dug out the entire rock. But the only thing that we needed to do was roll the rock off the newly dug pit to the side of the road and fill up the hole it had left in the road. We did just that, and we were able to drive the car back to our camping spot without any problems. This is a very vital part to the story too, because without the car, the following part of the story would have been a whole lot more creepy. As night fell, we decided to have dinner. Now, our camping spot consisted of 2 main parts. We had the dead end of the road where we set up our tents, and we had a narrow trail off about, say 30 meters long that led to a small peninsula. When we were on this peninsula, we had no vision of the tents due to the slight elevation and the density of the trees and all that. Because this peninsula was just so beautiful, it truly had an idyllic view on the river and the wildlife park on the opposite side of the river, we decided to have dinner there instead. Me and my girlfriend and one of the other friends started preparing our meals while the other 2 just remained near the tents to just have some time together. They're a couple and all. As we were preparing dinner, I got a bit bored and got one of the inflatable boats to pedal around on the river and look at the stars in. Nothing creepy had happened so far, but when I got back, however, my girlfriend and the friend there had heard a few dogs barking really aggressively about 50 to 100 meters away from camp. Since it was a pretty untouched area, and since we knew the fishermen we encountered before had dogs with them, we initially didn't think much of it, to be honest. Some time went by though, and I noticed that I hadn't seen Joey and his girlfriend in some time, so I decided to go up the pathway to our tents to look for them. I called their names, but I didn't get any answer. Still not expecting anything had happened, I go on gathering some supplies for dinner. Suddenly, however, and remember, it's pitch black at this point, I only had my torch on me. The 2 friends that I couldn't find, they ran down the road in my direction in a total panic. In the meantime, I heard the dogs barking again, and this time, they seemed closer than 100 meters. this. As my friends saw me, they started explaining what happened. Apparently, they wandered off up the road about 150 meters or so from the tents to sit and watch the river or something when they heard footsteps coming in their direction. Because they didn't have a torch or phone with a light on them, they initially got scared and Joey started shouting, "Who's there?" but got no answer. They then decided to go back to camp because things were getting a little bit creepy. When they got up and started walking, they noticed the footsteps were still going in their direction. Pretty terrified at this point, they decided to run, and as they did, the footsteps behind them went faster and faster until Joey and his girlfriend were near the car where my light was shining on them. It was only when they stopped into my light that the footsteps, they stopped too. As they told me this, the dogs were still going crazy. Not knowing whether there was a real danger too, I decided to get into the car, which was, thanks to the great digging work of the other friend, near our tents now. So we stepped into the car with me in the driver's seat and the other two in the back. I locked the car and put on the headlights, shining up the road. Of course, my girlfriend and the other friend were still on the peninsula cooking dinner. Joey got out to get them, while the dogs were still barking in the same manner they did before. And when everyone got in the car, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Joey seemed a bit more calm than before and shared my opinion. It was probably just an animal, and the dogs that we were hearing were probably reacting to that animal. The others, however, were not as convinced of that. Joey's girlfriend, who was the first to hear the footsteps, swears that they were definitely human. The others followed this idea, and ultimately, we decided to just get our stuff and find some other place to camp. Mind you, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning at this point. So, as we weren't sure if it was safe outside, we remained in the car for a bit to check the surroundings and to hear if the barking would stop. The barking kept on going for a while, but then it just suddenly stopped. And when it stopped, I noticed a shadow crossing the road just where the headlights hit the ground. I have no clue what it was, but it was fast, and as Joey's girlfriend stated, it definitely looked human. After a while, me and the two other men got out of the car and we started packing our stuff in order to just get the hell out of there. One of us kept an eye on the dark woods around us while the other two were packing. We heard the dogs barking again, but not as close as before. And finally, when everything was packed, we got in the car and we got the hell out of there. Now, I'm aware that the thing we encountered is possibly, or maybe even likely, just an animal. But after I did some thinking, it came to my mind that the two things mentioned earlier may have played a part in this. Obviously, we met the fishermen earlier on, and they had dogs, not the sweet golden retriever types too, and these guys seemed a bit eerie. Some of us thought that it could have been one of these guys that tried to sneak up on us. Also, the friendly Frenchman who towed us off the road and advised us to park higher up on the road, he was the only one who knew exactly where we were. A paranoid mind might think that this man may have come back for us and that he had deliberately advised us to park our car somewhere else so that we wouldn't have any form of protection. And last but not least, Joey's girlfriend still insists that she definitely heard human footsteps. Anyway, what or who it was is still pretty unknown to this day, but let's just be happy that nothing too bad happened to us. About 2 or 3 years ago during the spring, I was out for a weekend run along the river path in my city. It was about mid-morning, and seeing as there is a very popular restaurant and shops facility close by, this trail is fairly well used. This morning, there were small groups of people around, not overly busy, but thankfully busy enough. Otherwise, the following encounter would have been a lot more scary than it was. So, I'm partway down the trail and I pass a guy walking, who, just as I run past, says hello. I return a hello, and shortly after I pass him, I hear footsteps close behind me. I glance back, assuming it was another jogger and wanted to make sure that they had room to pass. But no, it was the guy I had just passed, and he was running behind me now. An important thing to note is that he was not in running attire. He was wearing jeans, a warm outdoor puffy vest, and a scarf and non-running shoes. I found him being behind me really odd since he had been walking the opposite direction as me, so would have had to have turned around to run behind me. So I sped up my pace. And well, he sped up his pace too. So I sped up again, and so did he. I might add at this point that he sounded pretty winded since I didn't think he was a regular runner, and I kept increasing my speed. On the third time of his catching up to me, he proclaimed, "Got you." And at this point, I had moved from thinking that this was just odd to being a bit frightened and unsure what his intentions were, even though it was broad daylight in a public place. So I yelled over my shoulder, "Please leave me alone," and he replied with, "Oh, sorry," which I thought would have been the end of it. But no, he kept running behind me, really close now. We were approaching a group of 3 people walking at this point, so I started jogging past them but did a quick U-turn right behind them, yelled back at him, "Stop following me," and sprinted back past the way that I had come. As I had hoped, there was no way that he could follow me now without raising the suspicion of other people. And so that is where the story ends. I've had a few bad experiences over the years, as I usually travel solo and do a lot of things by myself in my city. But this was the one that really made me wonder, what was he planning to do? Did he actually have ill intentions, or was he just mentally ill or socially awkward, and actually thought that there was nothing wrong with chasing someone? If it was a place or time of day with less people, would something worse have happened? I've thankfully never met him again, so that at least eased my mind that he wasn't someone stalking one of my regular jogging routes or something. But I sure hope that I don't ever see him again. So, this is going to be a bit out there for most people, but what I'm about to share with you guys is true and actually happened to me. If you choose not to believe me, well, that's fine. I mean, I wouldn't expect you to, but just don't be a dick about it, okay? This all happened around late May to early June in 2017. So, I lived out in Kentucky and have been there my whole life. I saved up some money and brought my first AR-style rifle. I had wanted one for a while, but just never really had the money to get one, so as soon as I got a chance, I grabbed it. I needed to sight in my gun after I bought it, and my family owns 20 plus acres of land, so I don't go to gun ranges around here because, well, first of all, people are dumb and our local one has bullet holes in the ceiling, and second, I prefer shooting on our own land. I had managed to grab a Magpul D60 drum magazine at Gander Mountain because they were having a going out of business sale, so I guess really I was going to sight in a gun and test out the magazine's reliability too. I barely had the magazine out of the box and had not gotten a chance to shoot it yet, but I looked up a bunch of the reviews and could never find one that had the problems mine did that day. So this is where things started to get a bit odd. My family has owned this land, and I've been shooting on it for decades. Nothing weird has ever happened here, that I know of at least, and I've taken people to the spot that this happened at, and nothing has recreated the feelings that I had that day. I grabbed my gun, the drum, and the 20 rounds of ammo, and went outside to cross over to our field. To get to the field, I have to go through a barbed wire fence and about 300 feet of wooded area. But the moment I crossed over the barbed wire, something just felt off. I've been over there 1,000 times before, and like I said, nothing weird ever happened down there, and I've never had any weird experiences there. But something just felt off that day. Like something just wanted me to leave, maybe. I kept going though, because nothing had ever happened out there before, and I just thought maybe I was being paranoid, or the wind and the air pressure were just right to give an eerie feeling or something. So I walk out deeper into the woods. The further I get, though, the stronger the feeling is. I feel like I'm being watched, like something nearby is just staring into my soul. I keep going, and I get halfway, and this feeling is borderline unbearable now. I stop dead in my tracks, and think to myself that something is off. Well, like I've said 1,000 times, though, nothing like this has ever happened before, so I was confused. I know something's going on, though, now, and when I grabbed my ammo when I left home, I didn't load it into the magazine because I wanted to hurry and get to the field so that I could get everything set up. And this is where I listened to that gut feeling that I had. I stopped dead in my tracks and loaded the magazine with the 20 rounds I bought. Something told me that something just wasn't right, and I needed to be ready just in case. Something was watching me, and I didn't know what it was or where it was. As I'm loading my magazine, out of nowhere, I just smell something dead. It just came out of nowhere, too. I'd been standing there for 2 minutes with no scent, and then, all of a sudden, it smells like a month of old rotting carcasses beside me. I look around, and directly behind me is a mangled animal that, aside from the smell, looks pretty much fresh. It was so mangled that the only thing that gave me a clue as to what the animal was what was left of its fur, which was a white-grey colour of some sort, which meant that it had to be a rabbit or maybe a possum. But the smell just didn't go along with the age of what it was. Whatever I caught the stench of, that couldn't have been it. I finished loading the magazine, immediately stuck it into my gun and held the bolt open. That way, if I tripped, my gun wouldn't fire accidentally. But for some reason, I just kept going. So, I'm nearly out of the woods now, and I can see the field that I'm going to dead ahead. And that's when it happened. This entire time, I've been walking alongside of a creek. The creek turns left as you approach the field that I was going to. As I got to the turn in the creek, I heard a large splash in the water, and I turned quickly, and what I saw, I'll never forget. This thing was easily 8 to 9 feet tall and stood on 2 legs. Aside from the water splash, it was dead silent. It had very long arms and long legs, and it was a light brown colour, almost the colour of a deer maybe. But it looked like skin, not fur. Perhaps the freakiest thing about it, though, was its size. It looked severely malnourished too, really skinny and tight skin across its body. I mean, for a visual, imagine taking a fully grown man that only weighs, say, 120 pounds and then stretch him out to be 9 feet tall, but he stays the same width and doesn't get skinnier as you stretch him out. It also had somewhat of an odd walk too, but this could have been caused by the mud near the creek bed possibly. It never faced me, so I didn't get a chance to see its front. It just kept walking and just never turned around. But whatever it was, it scared the absolute shit out of me. I mean, I was 99% sure that I knew what this thing was. I tried to close the bolt on my gun to chamber around just in case this thing turned around to fight or something, and I had no intention of shooting this thing unless it gave a sign that it was going to attack. If it was what I think it was, the gun wouldn't have done anything but just piss it off anyway. But when I tried to chamber around, the magazine would not let go of the round. The force of the bolt closing would break your finger if you were to try and close it on your finger. I'd been loading and unloading the magazine the day before to help loosen the spring to make it easier to load in the future. I could take the rounds out with my hand, but when I came across this fucking thing, somehow, it decides it wants to keep the fucking bullet. By now, the thing is gone, and I'm basically sitting there with my dick in my hand. That magazine never worked right again too, and I kept it a few more days, but had to send it back because it was tearing at my ammo. It would hold on to bullets so tight that the bolt tried to close and just scratched a gouge so deep in the casing, powder was almost leaking out. After it walked off too, I realized that if I had shot, I would have deafened myself anyway. The whole thing just caught me so off guard that I almost fired a round into a heavily wooded area without ear protection. I mean, I had brought some with me, but I didn't have it on. I was just so spooked that I wasn't thinking straight. Now, to answer some questions, what was it? To be honest, I have no fucking clue what it actually was, Me and a friend who knows more about this stuff than I do, we did some looking around and have narrowed it down to a skinwalker, goat man, or what I'm afraid it might actually be, a Wendigo. If you want a really good idea of what it looked like, look up the Wendigo from the game Until Dawn. Aside from the colour, it is exactly what I saw. And before anyone thinks that I'm just describing the one from the game, I didn't even know about the game until after I had my encounter. When I saw the gameplay, it actually made me feel really uncomfortable too because of how much it resembled what I saw. Everything that I had seen just matched a Wendigo perfectly. The stench of death, mangling animals to scare or intimidate humans, long arms, malnourished, tight skin, most are grey, but I've heard some are brown too, but except one thing, its behaviour. They're allegedly supposed to be hyper-aggressive and basically kill anything they see or drag it off and just eat it alive. So, if that's the case, why didn't it get me? I mean, it had ample opportunity but just never did. But why did it walk off and turn its back towards me? I haven't told my family about this, mainly because I just don't think that they'll believe me and they'll think that I'm crazy. But I think my dad could have possibly seen it, or something else at one point too. This is because before I saw it, out of nowhere, he just started burning sage around the house, saying that he liked the smell, even though he never said he liked the smell before and had never burned any before either. Now, for some info about the land, in case anyone doesn't know, the Wendigo is allegedly a Native American legend. They're a human who resorted to cannibalism, and a Wendigo spirit took them over after they ate and turned them into this monster. I live in Kentucky, and there were and still are Native Americans here. I find tons of flint every year on my family's land, in fact, and an occasional arrowhead too, which means that they were definitely on my land at some point. My mum has a lot of Native American blood in her too, so that means I have some too, somewhere. But now for the most important part of this story. Me and a friend who I've told this story to just realized 2 weeks ago that there's a Trail of Tears site less than 5 miles away, and it is entirely possible that this thing could have come from that way. Anyway, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer the best that I can. Also, if anyone has any info that could help me determine what it was that I saw for sure, or how to tell if it's still around, I'd really appreciate that. It's been almost a year and I haven't seen it again, but it still creeps me out. So this happened back when I was around 11 or 12, I'd say. So roughly about 14 years ago now. My parents and I moved from a small town to the city, and we got a great deal, apparently, on a house on a hill with a great view. I remember the day that we were moving in. The previous renters, mum and a son and kid was also close to my age, they were just finishing moving out, and I'll always remember the look on the mother's face as just being unsettled, to say the least. Anyways, fast forward a few weeks ahead, and we had everything set up at this point. And the way the couch was set up in the living room, you could see the hallway to my parents' room as well as to the laundry room out of the corner of your eye. And I shit you not, almost every single time that I'd be watching TV or playing games, out of the corner of my eye, I'd see this shadow going back and forth between the two rooms, almost constantly too, just whizzing back and forth. My dad said the same thing sometime later, as he didn't want to freak the shit out of his little kids, but apparently he'd seen it too. That was mainly the extent of it for some time too, but it was all the time. In fact, I got used to it as best as you could and sort of thought that it was my buddy, the ghost shadow. In fact, I remember talking to it out loud and constantly asking for it to not scare me if it could. So, that was fine, and we just lived with it for the time being. But time passed over 6 months to a year, and my parents got divorced. Dad left to live elsewhere, and I stayed there with my mum because it was an unreal deal, apparently. My mum used to work at a restaurant, and I stayed home alone until 11 p.m. usually. One night, though, it was around 10 p.m. and I was watching TV and just had a weird sense of being watched. Deeply. That kind of hair standing on the back of your neck feeling. And all of a sudden, almost instantaneously too, as I got that feeling, I looked to the window. You know when you can see someone in the reflection of a window? Well, it was that, except in the reflection, all I saw was a shadow inside the room about 7 or 8 feet behind me. These panes of glass were huge too, so I saw what looked like to me a silhouette of a human. I looked for what seemed like a long time, but it could have only been a few seconds, and then I looked away to comprehend what the fuck I just saw, and I didn't move and didn't take my eyes off the TV until my mum got home because I sure as shit didn't want to see anything else. My mum's experience was a bit more startling too. But she didn't tell me this until I was a lot older, as she didn't want to add to my terrified feelings of myself being home alone. So I was at my dad's for the night, and she was sitting on the couch that I was when I saw the shadow. Apparently, using her words, her Lady of Shalott picture lifted off the mantel of the fireplace, which was in the living room, stood in mid-air for a split second, and then just fell to the floor glass down. I remember the night too because my mum called my dad and we had to go visit mum late at night, and my parents stayed in bed together as I assume my mum was just completely scared shitless. We eventually found out, to our surprise, that the original owner of the house was the landlord's uncle. He was apparently very disgruntled towards women, and where we would constantly see the shadow whizzing back and forth between laundry room and hallway was the area that he had his workshop before they re-embodied that area of the house. We also found out that he was found dead in the house right next to the area where I apparently saw the shadow. On another twisted note, when we were moving out of the house, the landlord asked my mum in front of me, "So, did you see him?" Needless to say, I never went back to that place. Back in 2004, I was living in Savannah, GA. My old college roommate came to visit me and see the sights and all that, and we're both horror movie or ghost story fans, though neither of us really believe in paranormal phenomena at all. We decided it'd be fun, though, to take one of the ghost-themed walking tours after dinner. It ended at an abandoned hospital on Bull Street, the top floor of which served as a yellow fever ward during the final epidemic of the late 1870s. The next day, we took a walk around town, and when we reached the hospital, I mentioned to her that it didn't seem as creepy in the daylight. She agreed, and before I could object, slipped her skinny self between the chain double doors and disappeared inside. I had no intention of going inside and was actually concerned for her safety, so I called after her to be careful. A few minutes later, I still hadn't heard her say anything back, so I yelled, "Hey." As soon as the word was out of my mouth, I heard a window opening on the top 3rd floor. I looked up, and it was her leaning out of the window with this incredibly bizarre, flat, open mouth look on her face, and waving one arm as if to beckon me inside. I said, "Are you fucking joking?" And instantly, as soon as I looked down, she was coming back out of the door that she went in, on the ground floor, saying, "What? It's fine." I looked back up to the 3rd floor window, and she was gone, window closed. Even though there was no way for her to have gotten from the 3rd floor to the ground floor in under a second, I asked her anyway if she'd gone upstairs at all, and she said no, of course not. She hadn't even found upstairs, just looked around a bit. But I know it was her. Even with the sun above her, I recognized her distinctive hair. It's long, bright strawberry blonde. Except when she went in and came out, it was in a ponytail, and upstairs, it was down and swept over one shoulder. She was even wearing the same purple tank top. I just have no way of explaining this other than a glitch in the universe or something. I don't use drugs, I'm not in the habit of hallucinating, that's for sure, and I'm pretty skeptical about things in general. What are your thoughts? When I was about 14, we actually lost my childhood home. My brother moved in to live with our dad, and my sister and her boyfriend got their own apartment. She was pregnant at the time, and I decided to stay with my mum and stepdad. My grandma owned the house that we had actually been living in and lost it when she filed for bankruptcy. She didn't tell this until the bank showed up to do an inspection and gave us 30 days to move out. Luckily for us, my mum's best friend, she actually owned a house and said that we could move in and fix it up. This place was seriously dilapidated though, and just outright disgusting. Like, there were holes in the floors, bug infestations, stained crusty carpet, toilets filled with old poo. It hadn't been lived in for years, and the people who lived there previously, Mum's friend and her family, they honestly lived like pigs. On a side note too, my stepdad worked 12 hours a day, Monday to Friday, and my mum was severely depressed and addicted to prescription pills, Xanax, Klonopin, and all that stuff. Man was constantly in pill-induced slumbers. So, the first month in the house was by far the worst. I couldn't sleep at night because I could hear, like, muffled voices through the vents all night. I started sleeping with loud music playing, just to drown it all out, but every morning, the basement door was wide open, even though we closed and latched it at night because it had a serious spider infestation. But we thought it might have been my mum sleepwalking at first until it just continued to happen while she was in the psych hospital. All of my friends were too afraid to come spend the night again after their first night staying there, except one. This was because they just said it was creepy and they felt like they were being watched at night. My mum always slept on the couch because she couldn't be on the stairs after she took her pills and constantly said that she could see somebody looking at her from the kitchen doorway. We took it as her just hallucinating, until I saw it for myself when I stayed down to keep her company one night. It was tall and completely black, almost like a really defined shadow. I was completely paralyzed with fear when I saw it. I mean, I physically could not look away until it walked out of the doorway back towards the other room. I confirm my mum saw it too, and made her go upstairs that night, no matter how dangerous it was. My boyfriend also saw it a few weeks later when he was helping my stepdad fumigate the basement. He said that it was just standing in the corner, just staring at them, and they pretty much just noped the fuck out of there as soon as they saw it. We lived there for about a year after that, I think, and I saw it twice more, and each time it was just as terrifying as the first. My mum said that she saw it every single night, even when she started sleeping upstairs again. When we finally did move out, we saged the house and put a salt circle around it. Within 2 months of living elsewhere, my mum got clean too, and her depression got 1,000 times better. I later married the friend who owned the house's nephew and have been there a few times since then, but it's too uncomfortable to stay there for more than a few minutes. There's just something really off about that house. In my sophomore year of high school, I was on the cast and costume crew for our fall play. One of my castmates, or crewmates, was a really cute guy, and his name was Mark. He always wore skinny jeans, who I learned from a mutual friend was bisexual. So I started flirting with him, looking for opportunities to just hang out, sending him memes, everything a closeted nerd should do, right? After 3 months of flirting and hanging out and growing gradually more affectionate, I asked him out on the last day of our play, and he actually said yes. But the issue, my mother is a very conservative Christian, and although she's tolerant of gay people, I knew she'd never allow me to have a boyfriend while I lived with her. A side note too, I've had 4 boyfriends while I lived with her. So, we had to hide our relationship, which early on wasn't too bad. We'd go to the movies or his house and just hang out and whatnot. But everything started going downhill the first time we had sex. He started getting really demanding about hanging out, and by demanding about hanging out, I mean he was never not horny and frustrated. I was cool with it at first because, well, it's sex, but after a while, I was getting pissed about it. Working a relationship around my mum was difficult, and my generally asocial nature was not at all enjoying having to leave the house so often, and I tried to talk to Mark about it, and he seemed understanding for like a week. Then, he just started getting nasty. He'd avoid me at school, only text me to insult me, and act insanely jealous of my friends. Eventually, I had enough and I dumped him in July after 9 months. Yes, it was over text, while I was in Florida. Look, I was 16, so whatever. Anyway, he lost it and he blew up my phone daily for a week. But then he started acting normal, like we were friends again. But that lasted another month, and we go back to school, my junior year and his senior. And unfortunately, while we were dating, we tried to coordinate our schedules, so now we had 4 to 7 classes with each other. At first, he seemed okay, and then he started just staring at me. Then he started texting me again, sad messages this time. I figured he was done being a dick and started being nice to him again. But that was a big-ass mistake. So he started getting attached again, and he would try to integrate himself every time I went out with my friends. He would beg me to take him back, and I would say no and explain again and again why we just couldn't be together. Around October, he started getting bad too. Like 1 a.m. texts about swallowing a whole bottle of melatonin bad. In hindsight, I should have gone to the authorities, but I was terrified that doing so would lead to my mum finding out, so I tried to handle it myself, and that was a bad idea. He got worse. He started threatening to take his own life regularly, and he even tried to turn my friends against me. The worst day thus far came when we were building our homecoming float for drama club. I was hanging out and casually flirt bantering with 2 of my male friends, Isaac and Caleb, who are both straight. Mark saw this, stood up from where he'd been painting, and walked out in a hurry. A few minutes later, a freshman girl walked in, asking me where Mark was going, and he said I'd know. I actually found out later that he'd driven himself to the ER to get counselling, and to be honest, I was happy, thinking he'd get some help, but I had no damn clue how obsessed he was. I came home from rehearsal one day to find his car parked up on my street, and Mark walking towards it from my house. My mum was on the porch, just waving bye to him. She thought that we were just friends and actually really liked him. Apparently, he'd been in the neighborhood and thought to just drop by. Just for some background too, I'm the oldest of 7 boys. My youngest brothers were 2 years old and 6 months in the womb during this, and my mum raised us primarily by herself. Dad's a dirtbag, and stepdad was deployed through this ordeal. She is an honest 6 feet tall, about half that wide, and can easily sling me across her shoulders. I'm 6'3" and 180 pounds. She's also the best shot with a pistol that I've ever seen, by far. In other words, not someone Mark, 5'4" and 120 pounds soaking wet, would want to tangle with, even while she was heavily pregnant. So, I told her that we did hang out, just not as much. She accepted this, and we went about our days, and for a week, everything was okay. And then, I came home from rehearsal. Mark's car was parked up the street again, and he was sitting on our porch with my mother, who had my baby brother on her lap. She saw me get out of the car and gave me a come hither crook of the finger. Slowly, I walked up to the porch. It turned out that Mark had told her everything. Everything, I mean. Our whole relationship and everything that went with it, too. But with me as the abuser and himself as the victim. and she started to lay into me, and then dismissed Mark, who went back to his car just snickering. After she was done ranting, I calmly told her my side of the story. Fortunately, she actually believed me, but boy, she was still pissed. So, I was grounded, but that pales in comparison to what happened that night. Our house is old and crappy, and the windows, they can be easily jiggered open from the outside, even when they're locked. Mark knew this too, since I'd used this to my advantage many times when sneaking out. And Mum's room, where she and my 2-year-old brother sleep, is right across the hall from mine, facing the backyard. And mine's actually facing the street. So that night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I was cold, I think. After I got my glasses on, I saw white too. My window, it was open. I whipped around searching for whoever did it. My bedroom door was open too, and as I got up, I heard the sound of my mum's bedroom door quietly closing. I raced as quickly as possible to the door, and I heard something that, honestly, just stopped my heart. A metallic click, like a gun being cocked. I flew across the hall and threw Mum's door open, and the lights were on, and Mark was crouched in the corner, a cleaver in hand. My brother was sound asleep, and Mum was calmly sitting up in bed, glasses on, a Harry Potter book in her lap, 10mm pistol in her hands, pointed directly at Mark, who was shaking and sobbing. She told him to shut up before he woke the baby and directed me to call the cops so that she could keep an eye on him. Mark was taken into custody, but Mum declined to press charges. We couldn't afford it at the time, on the condition that Mark moved out of Arizona with his dad instead of staying in Missouri with his mum, which thankfully he did, and from then I hardly ever saw him, unless he was Snapchatting my friends begging to talk about me. Just standard shit, you know. Anyway, to this day, I don't know whether Mark was going for me, my mum, or possibly even my younger sibling, but whatever the case, I'm sure glad that my mum had a gun that night. So this happened around 10 years ago, I'd say, in 2008 or 2009. I was visiting my grandmother in a rural section of Lake of the Ozarks, near a small town with a hilarious name where I went to high school. I was very familiar with the area too, and when visiting my grandmother, I would often walk into town, taking backwood trails until I reached the main road going into town. Very rarely someone would stop and offer a ride, and normally I would accept. It's a small town in a rural area where everyone mostly knows everyone else, so I wouldn't even look up until I was getting into the vehicle. But after this, I stopped accepting rides altogether. So, I had just come home out of the woods and was walking along the side of the road. I was still maybe a mile or two out of town, I think, and just enjoying my walk. An older blue Ford Taurus pulls up next to me. The driver rolls down the passenger window and says, "Need a ride?" I hear and start to walk over, and I get in and get a good look at my driver. But the man looked like a greasier version of Charles Manson. Flat, stringy brown hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in over a week, and it came down to his jawline. He had salt and pepper 5 o'clock shadow and piercing wild blue eyes. Something about him too just rang every alarm bell in my body, and I went to get back out of the car, but we were already in motion. So, instead, I begin to look around the vehicle. The front is relatively normal and even clean, but the back seat is covered with a blanket. On top of the blanket is something that takes up nearly the entire back seat, wrapped in a tarp too. Whatever it is, stands about 1.5 feet off the back seat too. On top of all of this too, is a big black shaggy dog that's just staring right through me. He says, "What are you doing here?" The question snapped me back to the front seat, and I said, "I'm sorry, what?" He's staring at me instead of the road at this point, and asks, "What are you doing here?" I say, "Oh," laughing a little out of nervousness. "I'm visiting my grandmother, and I live in a college town about 90 miles from here, and I'm on my way to see some old friends." He frowns and then he states flatly, "No, why are you here?" I frown a little and everything in me is flashing red. Get out now. And I just say, "I just told you." And I mumbled it, and my tension is obviously rising visibly at this point, because the dog gives a low growl from the back seat. We're passing the sign for the country line now, and there's a gas station coming up that marks the beginning of the town. He's still staring at me, and then he begins screaming just out of nowhere, slamming his hands on the steering wheel. "Why the fuck are you here?" over and over again. At this point, I'm huddled against the door just shaking, and he pulls into the gas station. He states, not as a question, "Give me your glasses." There's no emotion, and without question, I just hand them over. And he goes into the store and says, "Wait here." I'm frozen in place, just shaking and trying to will my arms or legs to work, trying to start breathing again. I know whatever the hell is going on, that I need out of this fast. The dog gave another low growl, and that snapped me into action. I get up, almost rolling out of the car. Shakily, I walk into the store and, in an eagerly shaky voice, say to the guy, "This is close enough to where I'm going. I would like my glasses now, please." My eyesight is actually really poor, but I could feel the intensity of the glare that he gave me. I think the cashier could too, because she took a couple of steps back, closer to the store phone, and silently, he hands my glasses to me and continues to stare daggers at me as I put them on, and then just walks out of the store without saying a word to either of us. The cashier stares at me, clearly freaked out too, and she asks me, "What the fuck was that?" The adrenaline of the situation has started to wear off at this point, and the real gravity started to sink in on me. Tears are beginning to silently course down my face, and I ask, "Can I use your phone, please?" She nods and wordlessly hands it to me with a box of tissues, and she tells me that I can go into the manager's office to make my phone call and take as much time as I need. I thank her and go back and let my friends know what just happened. I also tell them that I'll be cutting through the woods to get to them, and because I don't want to see this guy ever again, that I'll be coming out behind the house. I took a few minutes to breathe and relax after I hung up, and when I went back out, the cashier asked if I was okay and if there was anything that she could do for me. I thanked her again and told her no, and I asked if she knew the guy. She said that she had never seen him before and didn't think that he was from the area at all. And that shook me even more. I give her my friend's phone number and ask her to call them if he comes back. I left and cut through the woods to my friend's house. We had a great afternoon after that too, and when I was ready to leave, they actually gave me a ride home this time. At the time, I must admit that it didn't bother me as much as it does now, but the longer I've had to think about it, the more curious I am about that back seat. That dog was not moving from on top of whatever it was unless the guy told him to, and I try not to think about what was under the tarp too much, but it looked just like how someone lying in the fetal position looks like from behind. Side note too, I'm a 6'1" male that was about 210 pounds at the time, and I wore my hair down to my waist with a full beard. I myself was a little intimidating too, and would occasionally accidentally scare people just from my appearance. But the aura this man gave off had me nearly pissing my pants, and there was no question that he definitely could have overpowered me. So I was walking home one evening and was up the road from my house, about 5 minutes walk away I'd say. And as I'm walking, I see this guy up on the alley, apparently not seeing something that he was hoping to see, and he turned around. We briefly made eye contact, but there was nothing to it, and he was walking really slowly anyway. By the time that I'd walked another 30 seconds down the road, I looked back as I was turning the corner, and he had only just emerged back from the alley. I'm now heading down the road, just leading to my street, and there's a guy getting into his truck with his wife. The truck is facing up the street in my direction too, and He flashes his headlights, which I didn't quite understand, but then I hear a scuff behind me. And the fucking guy from the alley is right behind me, like within arm's reach, even though I'd heard nothing until he was right there. I'm pretty sure that I actually visibly jumped upon seeing him so close, and he was walking like an absolute demon. I mumble a greeting out of just pure reflex and start to cross to the other side of the road, removing my backpack in the process. He doesn't respond by greeting or even looking at me. He's just looking dead ahead like I'm not even there. And he just starts running as soon as I moved. He bolts down the road and turns right into another alley, and I hear some banging on a wooden fence, and as I walk past the alley about 30 seconds later, I take a glance and it's empty, which means that he must have vaulted a fence or something. To this day, I still don't know how the guy moved so fast to catch up to me in such a short space of time, or how I didn't hear him. I mean, I've got pretty good hearing, and he must have been sprinting to catch up to me, but I just didn't catch it. It was really weird shit. So here's a little backstory first. So this happened back in the fall of 2016. I was a newlywed, 18, and moved halfway across the country to live with my husband. I was in a new town and had no friends whatsoever. My husband, he was deployed in the early spring of 2016 too. A few months into deployment, I was getting really lonely and just wanted to head home. So I decided to make the 16-hour trek home alone, and I packed up my essentials and my cats, and I left at 11 p.m. because I couldn't sleep. I was about 4 hours into my drive, I think, and I was growing pretty tired, so I pulled into a well-lit public rest stop so that I could catch some shut-eye. I pulled my car into a spot right under a light, and I made sure cars were nearby. So it's about 3 in the morning at this time, and I fall asleep, but the next thing I know, I hear a knuckle tapping on my driver's side window. Sleepily, I wake up and see an older man, maybe about mid-40s I'd say, kneeling down to my window, and stupidly, I open my driver's side door. "Please don't shoot me, ma'am." I won't. What do you want?" My wife and I, we're stranded here and we need money. Do you have any? We're right over here." He points to the van parked in the dark off behind him at this point. "Yeah, we're just over here if you want to follow me." No, man, I'm good. I don't have any money. I'm sorry." At this point, I'm beginning to feel like something is wrong. "Oh, come on, I swear I'm up to no harm. Just come over to my van. My wife is in there." "Sorry, but I don't have any money, and I'm using the rest of my money to go home, okay?" "All right, miss, all right. God bless. God bless." And with that, he stumbles off to the next car on my right to do the same thing. But now, I'm wide awake, and quite honestly, I was feeling scared. I turn on my car eventually, and I just peel out of the lot, and I don't know what he wanted. I didn't see a woman in the van that he kept pointing at, but I know that I didn't want to find out. And to be honest with you guys, I have a hunch that that whole episode was some sort of kidnap attempt. When I was in middle school, about 11 years old at the time I'd say, I had a neighbor who lived directly across the street who barely ever came out of his house. He was really tall and always wore black clothes, windows always dark, almost like they were boarded up from the inside or something, and it just had an uncanny creepiness about him. Most people in the neighborhood felt the same way too. Basically, the only reason people knew he existed was because he would just randomly open up his front door and walk extra slow to the mailbox and then back inside of the house, sometimes not even getting the mail. So yeah, just a really weird guy. And I was never, ever allowed to have my window blinds open, and if I was caught with mine open, my parents would scold me, and they were just really serious about that. So, I was waiting at my bus stop one morning. It's about 6:45 in the morning, I think, and the sun was barely up yet. My bus stop was at the end of my driveway, only about 20 steps away from the front door to my house. While picking a song on my iPod with my headphones on, I noticed in my peripheral that creepy neighbour is walking up our street. It's a hill, and at this point he's past my driveway and going further on up the hill, but not quite to the top where it plateaus. But then he suddenly turns around and he's walking back down the hill. At first, I didn't think it was that weird because, like I said, he just does weird things often anyway. But then I realised that he's cutting across the road diagonally, directly towards me. My brain is processing what's happening, and considering nothing had ever happened to me before that would make me be concerned for my safety or anything. I mean, the neighbourhood is safe, and the fact that I was a kid and all that, I thought maybe he just wanted to talk to me or something. I must admit that I was a little scared, but for some reason, my first thought wasn't to run away or anything. And then I hear a slam, and my dad's sprinting out of the door to get me. Apparently, he was watching from the window and wasn't about to let this guy do whatever he wanted to do. I remember my dad let me stay home from school that day and was calling around local authorities, school officials, everyone, and we even moved shortly afterwards. So, a few years go by and I get one of those sex offender apps. And it turns out that creepy guy was actually a registered sex offender, aggravated sexual assault with complaint, less than 13 years of age. And he was also in possession of CP. So yeah, I don't know what he was doing crossing that road early in the morning when it was dark and heading towards me, a small 11-year-old, with nobody around and my parents not there, but whatever it was, I have to assume that it was something pretty sinister. So, just a bit of context before I begin. I went to a small liberal arts college that had on-campus housing in addition to dorms and whatnot. I was an RA, a resident assistant for a grouping of houses. I was in charge of a large house that had a lot of people too, and this happened in February of 2017. So, in my junior year of college, I find a camera in my room. I had just returned from home from dance rehearsal, so I took a shower, changed, fixed a poster, and watched some vines. As I'm getting ready for bed, I pick out a hair bow that I wanted to wear the next day, and, well, among the hair bows, I spot a small black box. My first thought is that it's one of those funky little ant traps and the maintenance guy just left it there or something, which would also be weird because I was the RA of that particular building and should have known about any maintenance anyway. But I picked it up and it had a bit of tape on it. I peeled back the tape to reveal a red light. And well, fuck. I flip it over and find some words, and I don't remember exactly what it said, but it had the make and model of the camera. At that moment, I realize what it is, and my heart drops. I mean, what the fuck, right? So, I run down the hall to my two good friends' room and show them. We find that there's an SD card left in the camera, and we want to look on it, but none of our laptops have an SD card reader. No biggie though. My friend works for the library and says that she'll rent a reader from them. The next day I come home from classes and I take a peek at what my friends have found. There's footage of me and several other girls in assorted buildings and room. Luckily there was no compromising footage of me, which I was very thankful for, but there was footage of some other girls peeing and brushing their teeth, just all sorts of stuff. I didn't see all the footage, so I don't know exactly what else was on there, but fuck, right? But then, they show me the footage of the person hiding the camera. Yeah, you heard that right. This idiot who hid the camera recorded themselves doing it. And not only that, but I recognized them. They were another RA on the same staff team as me. At this point, I am freaking the hell out. I call our boss, who's doing interviews for next year's RAs, and go, dude, I have to talk to you right now. I tell him the situation and he seems calm and says it'll take care of it, but he needs me to come to his office later that night, and I say okay. The next part of that day was excruciating. I had to go to a dinner meeting for a campus organization that I was president of, and I was worried the person might come back and take the camera while I was gone, so I grabbed it and took it with me. My freshman year roommate was there with me too, and on the drive home she asked me what was wrong. I told her and showed her the camera, and as we were sitting in the parking lot, someone is walking towards my building. And who should it be but the fucker who hid a camera in my room. At this point, I'm having a full panic attack. And my friend says that she'll cover for me and she'll watch the house while I get the fuck out of there, so I just book it away from there and I hid in another building until she let me know that he was gone and away. At this point, I meet with my boss and I tell him what happened. He looks at the footage with his boss and I answer questions for campus security and then I answer questions for the city police. My boss and I go back to my house to make sure that there were no other cameras, and they take the guy into question and put him into a detaining center of sorts. They keep him in an unoccupied suite in a dorm on campus or something, and I don't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I have no updates on what's going on, and I'm just looking over my shoulder every 5 seconds and absolutely terrified that he is loose and going to come after me or something. But then I get a call, and apparently he's not allowed out of the room. I have to answer some more questions for another police officer, and then they tell me what they learned from him. Apparently, he'd begun this voyeuristic shenanigans by hiding the camera in one of his fraternity brothers' rooms and managed to film him having sex. At this point, he went and hid the camera in the woman's bathroom and bedrooms of his female residents too, and I don't remember how many, but there were at least 7 people filmed. They arrested him and he was in jail for 3 days and then released to get his stuff and to go to his hometown until they had the school trial. During this time, the school has to tell our staff team that he'll no longer be there for the rest of the year. They refused to tell the team what happened or let me tell anyone. They said it was so that he could leave with dignity, as he deserved it or something. Anyway, months go by, and after many meetings with assorted people, they have his trial and he is expelled. A year later, he has his legal trial with the state the school that I attend is in, and I was never informed of the results. I still need to call the police station, in fact, and this was all a few months ago. However, I did receive a restraining order in the mail. Somewhere during all of this mess, I figured out how he got into my house and how he actually hid the camera too. He got into my house because he'd actually been granted a keycard access. I lived in a weird village house which had keycards and not keys. He was granted this access because one of my residents needed help getting her stuff out of storage, but had accidentally mailed her keys and keycard back home. Apparently, security thought the best way to handle this was just to give him the keycard access to our house. He knew exactly when I would be in the house because the night it was hidden, we had a staff meeting and I told our group chat that I would be leaving a few minutes early to pick up snacks. In other words, he knew exactly where I was going and that I wouldn't be home. It just really sickens me to think that before he hit that camera, we were laughing in rehearsal together, and after he did it, we were joking around at our staff meeting, just acting totally normal as if he didn't just violate my privacy and all that. It's kind of creepy to think that this guy could have got away with this, and maybe all those photos were going to be uploaded to the internet or something. I don't know what his intentions were or why I put the camera there or what was going on, but man, it was creepy. So, this happened to me in high school, in my senior year actually. I had finally made some good friends and used to clog up my parents' landline and just stand outside on the phone talking away. We had a ranch-style house with a fairly long driveway, and across the street from my house, and the whole block in fact, was just one giant field. There was a mansion that a local doctor owned far back in the field. Just trying to paint a picture of what everything looked like for you guys, but More or less, if you stood on the driveway to my house looking across the street, there was nothing but empty field as far as you could see. At the end of the driveway was our mailbox, which stood next to the only streetlight on the block too. So one night, I was standing at the end of my driveway just talking on the phone to a friend, and my mother kept popping her head out of the front door complaining for me to get off the phone and come inside, as it was late. Me being a teenager, I gave her the "give me 5 minutes" line multiple times and just kept on talking. I remember complaining about her to my friend, how she was annoying me, etc., etc. But at some point, I started hearing my name being called again. Only this time, it was more of a loud whisper, like when you're quietly trying to get someone's attention or something. I distinctly remember saying to my friend something along the lines of, "Oh shit, she's yelling at me again," and just kept talking. A few moments later, I heard my name being called again, ignored it, kept talking, and again a few moments later, and also heard "come over here" at some point. I turn around and realize that the front door is closed. I know that I thought that was odd, but not enough that it really registered at the time anyway, so I said bye to my friend and headed inside. I get inside and my parents had just gotten into bed, so I complained to my mum that she didn't have to keep yelling at me. She could have just allowed me to finish my call, all that stuff. To which she responded that she hadn't stuck her head outside in like an hour or so. So, it cut to hours later, and it's around 2 a.m, and I was in my room watching Evil Dead. I'm a big horror fan, and I got up and headed to the kitchen to make some ramen. And my mum, who had heard me in the kitchen, yelled at me from the bedroom to make sure the front door was locked before I went to bed. I walked out of the kitchen and headed to the front door, making sure it was locked. Now, the front door was one of those that had an oval of frosted glass in the center so that you could look through it clearly in tiny sections, but other parts were frosted so that you couldn't. So I did what I normally did and looked through one of the tiny clear sections and habitually looked at the street lamp at the end of the driveway. Kind of like when you go to close the blinds and all that. You just kind of habitually look outside as you do. However, I, for some weird reason, just couldn't see the street lamp. For a split second, I thought maybe the light had gone out. Until whoever was standing on the other side of the glass door moved to the side. Well, needless to say, I fucking hightailed it straight to my parents' room, waking my dad and telling him what had happened. He got out of bed with my mum and grabbed a bat and went outside to check. And they didn't find anything. Had turned on all the lights and there was nothing. So, creeped out, I go to bed. The next morning, I wake up and head to my car for school, and the driver's side door was slightly ajar. I figured I had just moronically left it open or something the night before and just got in and went to school. School ends and I get home to find a police car in the driveway. Apparently, someone had broken into our garage overnight and stole my dad's tools and anything else of worth. But not only that, the person had apparently robbed several of the homes on our block over the course of the past week. In other words, I did see a person that night, and the person was calling my name out to come closer to them. The scarier shit to realize that whoever it was literally hiding somewhere around my house, baiting me while I was on the phone, and then hours later was still outside, looking in through the front door for me. It's been 10 years, but quite honestly, I'm still pretty shook by the whole thing.